Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. You know those stories you hear growing up, the ones your grandmother whispers by the fire, the ones the old drunk at the bar slurs just before closing time, the ones that always end with, and no one's been back since. This is one of those stories. Only difference. Someone did go back. It was called the Marrow House, a weather-beaten Victorian mansion glowing at the edge of Hollow's End. People said it had teeth in its floorboards and eyes behind its walls. No one lived there for the past 60 years. Not since the Caldwell family vanished. They didn't die, they didn't move, they simply disappeared. Left behind an uneaten dinner, a still, burning fireplace, and a baby's crib that was found rocking slowly when the first police officer stepped inside. Some said they went mad and wandered into the forest. Others said the house took them. The truth, no one wanted to know. But here's where it begins to shift from legend to reality. On September 2nd of this year, the front door of the Marrow House slammed open on its own for the first time in 6 decades. It wasn't a stormy night. There was no wind. No pranksters in sight. The mailman saw it during his morning route. He refused to get close, but he saw the door swing inward, wide like a gaping mouth. Enter Daniel Weaver, 38 years old, professor of folklore and urban myth at a second-tier college in Maine. Divorced, quietly bitter, and completely out of touch with his own daughter. He had spent the last 5 years obsessed with what he called places that remember, not haunted houses in the cheesy, sheet-draped sense. No, Daniel studied the kinds of places that don't just trap ghosts, they keep memories alive. Places that feed off of silence. That wait, he'd read about Marrow House in a forgotten thesis paper from the 70s, buried in the college archives under a box labeled Local Curiosities. The paper was written by someone named Elias Caldwell. A relative, probably. The tone was strange, part report, part confession. Elias wrote of lights in the floorboards, voices in the wallpaper, of rooms that shouldn't exist and clocks that ticked backwards. But what made Daniel lose sleep was the last line scrawled in a hurried, jagged hand. It remembers me. It remembers us. God help whoever it remembers next. And so, 2 weeks after the door opened, Daniel packed a single duffel, rented a Jeep, and drove to Hollow's End. He didn't ask permission. He didn't check in with local authorities. He didn't even tell his department chair. He only told one person, his daughter Clara. She was 15, blunt as a hammer, and had stopped calling him Dad sometime around his 2nd year of absences and half-baked birthday apologies. But when he said he was going to the Marrow House, her voice changed. She didn't ask why. She just whispered, "Please don't go in." Then she hung up. It should have stopped him. Maybe in another life it would have. But Daniel was already driving when he made that call. He reached Hollow's End just past midnight. The town was a ghost. No welcome sign, no streetlights, no gas stations. Just rows of empty homes that looked like they were holding their breath. And at the very end, just where the trees began to knot together like clenched fingers, stood the Marrow House. It was taller than he expected. The porch had collapsed in on the left side, leaving a yawning shadow where the floorboards had rotted away. Ivy strangled the chimney, and every window was either shattered or shut with black curtains. But the door, that ancient, cursed door, stood wide open, waiting. Daniel parked on the gravel path and stepped out into the cold. The wind bit his ears, and the trees behind him rustled in protest like they knew what was coming. He stared at the house for a long moment. Then he stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It wasn't just the smell, though that was bad enough. All rot and old mildew. It was the weight. Something thick settled over his shoulders, as though the air itself was pressing down, urging him to leave. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No creaks, no groans. Even his footsteps felt smothered, like the floor didn't want anyone knowing he was there. Daniel moved through the front hall slowly, flashlight beam dancing across cracked wallpaper and a shattered chandelier. The staircase loomed to his right, balusters carved with snarling beasts he didn't recognize. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its hands spinning wildly. And then it stopped, just as he passed. The second hand clicked once, then pointed straight at him. He turned sharply, but there was no one behind him. Only the hall. But something was wrong. It had gotten longer. He was sure of it. There had only been 2 doors when he came in. Now there were 5, all identical. All shut. He tried the first one. Locked. Second one. Same. The third opened with a dry creak, revealing a study coated in a century of dust. Books lined the shelves, their spines chewed by moths and time. On the desk lay a notebook, leather-bound. Familiar. He picked it up, heart thudding. The first page was a mirror of the thesis he'd read. Elias Caldwell's handwriting. But the entries continued beyond what he'd seen. Page after page of frantic notes. Descriptions of doors that led to different houses, of mirrors that didn't reflect the room they were in. Of someone, or something, walking in the walls. The final entry was short. I made a mistake. The house doesn't want me to leave. Every door brings me back here. If you're reading this, you're already part of it. It knows you now. A sudden noise, like a chair scraping on wood, came from upstairs. Daniel jumped, dropping the notebook. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. He hesitated, heart pounding in his throat. Curiosity wrestled fear in his mind. Then, step by trembling step, he climbed the stairs. They groaned beneath his feet, each one sounding too loud, too deliberate. At the top, the hallway was choked with shadows. Portraits lined the walls, faces blurred, eyes scratched out. A cold draft kissed the back of his neck, but when he turned, the staircase was gone, just wall. Panic flared. He spun in circles, flashlight trembling. The hall stretched endlessly in both directions. No doors, no windows, just walls pulsing slightly, like they were breathing. Then, from behind him, a whisper. Not words, just breath, slow and wet. He turned and saw a mirror. It hadn't been there before. In the reflection was the hallway, but not him. Instead, a tall, thin figure stood where he should have been. Its face was covered by a burlap sack, stitched at the mouth. It raised a finger to its lips. Daniel stumbled back. The mirror shattered without a touch. And behind it, a door. He ran through it blindly, down another staircase, into a kitchen that stank of old meat. The table was set for 5. Plates full of rotten food. Chairs still warm. A baby cried from somewhere deep in the house. He shouldn't have followed the sound, but something about it was off. Not a baby exactly. More like something pretending to be a baby. It echoed wrong. Too crisp. Too knowing. Still, he walked. Past the dining room where shadows moved without cause. Past the parlor where the fireplace was burning even though the wood was ash. Into a nursery. The crib was empty. Rocking gently. A mobile spun above it, though there was no breeze. One of the toys was missing. The thread where it hung was frayed, stained with something dark. A voice behind him. She's not in there anymore. Daniel turned so fast he almost fell. A man stood in the corner, pale, dressed in outdated clothes, holding a pocket watch that ticked counter-clockwise. His eyes were milky, but they stared straight through Daniel. She left. Long time ago, the man said, voice like dry leaves. But she always comes back. Who are you? Daniel asked. The man smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. I'm the last one who thought he could leave. Now I'm part of the house. And with that, he faded. Not disappeared, faded. Like a dream upon waking. Daniel turned to run. Every step he took was met with a new room. No doors led outside. Windows showed only fog. His flashlight died. The air grew colder. The walls creaked with laughter. He stopped in the hallway, panting. His breath formed words in the air. He couldn't read them at first. Then they became clear. Yo you skoyeldntavu. He dropped to his knees. The floor pulsed beneath him, like a heartbeat. And then a sound. Footsteps. Slow. Coming closer. But not from behind. From above. Scraping against the ceiling. Then pounding. Then silence. He didn't move. Couldn't. And that's when the whisper came again. Right in his ear. She knows you now. Daniel screamed. And the house smiled. It started with breathing. Not his own. Daniel could feel his own lungs stutter and wheeze, panicked and ragged. This was something else, shallow. Measured. Close. Almost too close. He froze. His body unwilling to even blink as a sound so human, so intimately wrong, curled around his neck like fingers. He twisted around, heart galloping, but there was no one there. The hallway was the same walls sagging inward, paint peeling like skin, shadows pressed in corners like they were hiding something. But nothing else. No figures. No ghosts. Just silence. And yet the breath still came. It was then he realized it wasn't behind him anymore. It was above him. He looked up. The ceiling was low, cracked in places, the old wood beams thick with mold. His eyes swept across the boards and stopped. A crack, just wide enough, and behind it movement. Not movement in the human sense. Something slithered across, dragging itself with the weight of a body too long, too heavy. It groaned with each drag, like it hated moving at all. Dust sifted down. Daniel didn't wait to see more. He ran. Door after door blurred past him. He didn't check where they led anymore. He knew better now. The house was watching. The house chose what door led where. He knew, because one door he flung open showed a black void that moaned when the light hit it. Another led to a room identical to his childhood bedroom, except every photo on the wall had his mother's smile carved into them with a knife. He burst into what must have once been a library. It was circular, with impossibly high shelves reaching into pitch darkness. The fireplace was cold and yet glowed faintly, casting light without flame. In the center, a chair turned away from him. He should have turned back, but something about the stillness of the room, how the house itself seemed to quiet around it, gave him pause. So he stepped forward, just once. The chair creaked, slightly, as if something adjusted its weight. Elias, Daniel said, voice barely above a breath. The chair turned slowly. But it wasn't Elias. It looked like a man, or it used to. The skin hung loose from the bones, like the body beneath had withered too fast. The eyes were stitched shut. Lips too. And still it seemed to be watching him. The air shifted again. Something like static filled Daniel's head, and then the stitched thing moved. Not much. Just a twitch of its finger. The door behind Daniel slammed shut. He backed away, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Who are you?" he asked. The stitched thing tilted its head, and then, impossibly, it spoke, not with its mouth, with the room. The walls vibrated. The shelves shuddered, and a whisper like 1,000 voices threaded together echoed. W, Remy, M-E-R. Daniel fell against the nearest shelf, scattering books like brittle leaves. Wowcome ta lustin. Celestat N. And with that, the walls began to bleed. Dark liquid oozed between the floorboards, down from the shelves, from behind the bricks of the fireplace. It wasn't blood, it was darker. Thicker. Like the house itself was leaking memory. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room groaned again, and the stitched man stood. Only now, there were others behind him. More chairs. More stitched faces. Men. Women. Children. Each one stood slowly, limbs cracking, mouth sewn shut. Each one turned to him. Each one remembered. Daniel screamed. The bookshelves rattled violently and collapsed inward. And just like that, the room was gone. He was in the front foyer again, back where he started. But the door wasn't open anymore. He reached for it and pulled. Locked. Of course it was. But the lock didn't click shut. It breathed. Like the door didn't close. It chose. He stepped back. That's when he saw it, riding above the archway. It had been too faint to read before. Now it glowed softly, carved into the wood. The whose east dos do fargi iv. The ostas nawa farget. His hands trembled. The flashlight flickered again. But it wasn't the bulb dying this time. Something was moving in the beam, just at the edge, like it didn't want to be seen, but didn't mind being noticed. A shape. Thin. Too thin. Legs bending wrong. Arms long enough to touch the floor. It walked upright, but it was all wrong. Like it had studied humans and almost got it right. Daniel turned and ran again. He no longer tried to think of exits. There was none. He no longer tried to make sense of the rooms. There was no logic, only the house. And the house was awake. He crashed through a door and found himself in a bathroom. The mirror was shattered. The bathtub was full. No water. Something dark. And in it, floating gently, a child's shoe. He stepped closer. The darkness rippled. Something beneath the surface stirred. He reached for the flashlight and shone it directly into the tub. Two small hands reached up and grabbed his wrist. He screamed and yanked back, tumbling into the wall, but the hands didn't pull, they just held. And then, slowly, a face rose from the tub. A little girl. Pale, lips blue, eyes wide. She looked up at him with a strange expression, not fear, not even sadness, recognition. She opened her mouth and water spilled out, not just from her lips, but from her eyes, her nose, her ears, as if she was filled to the brim. She tried to speak, choking on the flood. Daddy. Daniel froze. No, he whispered. I don't have a daughter that young. But the girl floated higher, reached out with one wet hand. Her fingernails were cracked. The other hand held something. A small, dirty locket. She dropped it into the water. It vanished. Then she did too. Daniel staggered out, coughing, shaking, broken. He couldn't stay here. But there was no leaving, only forward. The house shifted again. The hallway now led downward. Steps he hadn't seen before now opened like a mouth into a basement that should not have existed. He descended. The air grew thick. And then, the watchers returned. He didn't see them, but he felt them, dozens, hundreds, standing just outside the light's reach. Too still, too silent. But there, he reached the bottom. A door stood waiting, wooden, old, different, not part of the house. Carved into it, deeply, were the words, "Se sel eeps below boo." His hand reached for the knob on its own, against everything, against every sense of reason. As his fingers touched it, something shifted behind him. The watchers took a step forward, and for the first time they made a sound. They began to hum, a soft, slow, rattling hum, like wind through hollow bones, and it was the most terrifying sound Daniel had ever heard. He opened the door. Inside, only darkness, and from deep within it, a lullaby began to play, and something woke up. The lullaby didn't come from a speaker or a box tucked away in the shadows. No, this wasn't something playing. This was something alive. A tune being sung by a mouth older than the bricks that held this house together. It came from deep within the dark. A child's voice, yes, but not a child's innocence. There was something wrong in the way the notes lingered too long, stretched too thin, like they were being pulled from vocal cords that had forgotten how to stop. Daniel didn't want to step forward, but his body betrayed him. His foot moved. Then the next. He descended into a dark so complete it pressed against his skin like water. The air changed, thicker, moister, tasting like rust and old teeth. Behind him, the humming of the watchers continued, low and steady, like a warning, or a dirge. The flashlight, flickering weakly now, caught something in the beam. A wall, but not one built by hand. It was curved, covered in a skin like texture. Breathing, slowly. He moved the light higher. Shapes, dozens of them, embedded in the walls. Some were faces, some were just mouths. All of them were singing, the same lullaby, each one twisted in agony. But they never stopped. Daniel's legs buckled. He pressed a hand to his mouth to stop from retching. One of the faces turned toward him, not with eyes, for there were none, but with awareness. The mouth opened wider and began to sing louder. And that's when Daniel recognized the melody. It was the song Clara used to hum as a toddler, something he hadn't heard in over a decade. No, it couldn't be. He backed away, but the room stretched deeper. The light showed more faces, some human, some not, some animalistic parodies of faces, all locked in a permanent state of melody and misery. "Who are you?" he choked out. The answer didn't come from the wall. It came from below. The floor beneath him rippled. Not a metaphor, actually rippled like something had moved just beneath the surface. A wet, sloshing sound followed it, and then stillness, until the lullaby stopped. Every voice, every mouth, every face, all fell silent in an instant. The flashlight blinked once, then twice, then went out, and in that abyss, something exhaled. A slow, deliberate breath, long enough that it must have come from a chest the size of a truck. It vibrated through the ground and into Daniel's spine. Then came the voice. Not loud, not booming. Just there. "You came to hear the story. You will stay for the end." Daniel screamed and bolted, but his legs didn't move fast enough. Something unseen surged from the dark. Not a body, not claws, just presence. And it pushed. He slammed against a wall. His head cracked the wood. Blood filled his vision. The flashlight slipped from his grip and rolled, casting erratic beams across the floor. For a fraction of a second, the light caught something standing across from him. A girl, maybe 8 years old, soaking wet, hair stringy and matted. Skin pale, swollen like she'd been underwater too long. It was Clara. No, not Clara, it looked like her. But the eyes were empty. Literally. 2 black voids that shimmered with things behind them. Faces, claws, stars that blinked sideways. She opened her mouth, and Daniel saw a second row of teeth behind the first. "Daddy," she gurgled. "No," he whispered. "You left me," she said. But the voice didn't match. It was deeper, older, layered with echoes that came from nowhere. I didn't. You forgot me." Her jaw cracked wider. Skin tore at the corners. Her hand snapped into angles fingers should never make. She ran. Daniel rolled just in time. Her claws scraped across the stone where his head had been. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. Blinded by panic and the spray of his own blood, he scrambled toward the hallway he came from. The watchers had stopped humming. Now they were chanting. Low, deliberate. "She wakes. She wakes. She wakes." The hallway tilted. No, not tilted, shifted, like the house was rearranging its bones. He stumbled into another room. It wasn't the one he left. This one was bright. Too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The walls were stark white, sterile. A hospital bed sat in the middle, straps hanging loose. Daniel's heart dropped. He knew this room. From a dream. No, from a memory. It was the mental ward his mother had died in. Except she wasn't in the bed now. He was. His own body, strapped to the bed, eyes open, mouth whispering the same lullaby. No, 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 no. The walls pulsed once. The bed twitched. And then, the figure in the bed smiled. Not his smile. Not his at all. It lifted its hand, pointed at him, and whispered, "Wake up." The light shattered. Darkness again. Daniel collapsed into what felt like a stairwell, rolling until he hit a wall. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. What was real? What was this place? The house had shown him things he couldn't trust. Memories twisted into monsters. Faces borrowed from his past. But why? He sat there, shaking, until something soft touched his shoulder. He screamed and spun. A boy stood there, maybe 6, dirty blonde hair, tears in his eyes, normal, too normal. "I don't want to sing anymore," the boy whispered. Daniel stared at him, unsure if he was another trick. "Are you real?" he asked. The boy nodded. "I think so. I think I was before, but she made me sing." "Who is she?" The boy looked up. Fear gripped his face. "The one beneath. She's coming," he whispered. Then the boy shattered. Not exploded. Shattered, like porcelain dropped from height. He broke into pieces that were hollow inside. From the pile, black smoke began to rise, and with it, footsteps, slow, click, drag, click, drag. Daniel stood, fists clenched, eyes wide. Whatever was coming, it had his name in its mouth, and it was done whispering. It was time to scream. There was no grace in the way she walked. The sound was unmistakable, bare feet slapping against damp wood, followed by the dry scrape of something long and sharp dragged behind. A cadence not meant for rhythm, but for warning. Each step a statement. Each drag a promise. And though Daniel stood frozen in the stairwell, fists clenched tight, he already knew he wasn't ready to meet her. The thing that wore the face of his daughter, that climbed from the tub and whispered lullabies soaked in decay, that wasn't her final shape. No. She had another, and she was wearing it now. He backed up slowly, his shoes slipping on the cracked stairs, but his eyes never left the top where the sound grew louder. Closer, more certain, and then silence. No more footsteps, no more dragging, just the house breathing, creaking as it settled around him. He knew better than to think she had gone. Silence was never a mercy here. It was a setup. He turned, too fast, and stumbled into another hallway that hadn't been there moments before. It stretched far into the dark, lined with doors that blinked in and out of existence, warping the very architecture. Some doors pulsed, others wept. Daniel chose none. Instead, he pressed his body against the wall, chest heaving. He forced his breath low, tried to listen, to think. But the house did not give time for thought. The lights above flickered once, twice, then went out, and from behind him, a voice, thin, rasped, gurgling, whispered, "Where do you think you're going?" He turned, but nothing was there. No figure, no shadow, only the hallway, only the cold. Then he felt it. The wet breath at his neck. He spun and ran blindly, slamming into walls, doors, maybe even furniture. He didn't care. The hallway twisted as he moved, shifting angles, tilting floors, forcing his balance off. At one point he found himself running along the wall, the ceiling above like some cruel joke. The house didn't care for logic anymore, if it ever had. He pushed through a swinging door and collapsed into a grand dining hall, immaculate, untouched, too perfect. A full table, silver dishes gleaming, candles lit, food steaming. He froze. This place, this one place, felt wrong for a different reason. It was untouched by the horror, and that made it worse. 10 chairs lined the table. 9 were filled, each by a person with no face, no mouths, no eyes, no noses. Just smooth, pale skin where features should be. They sat in perfect posture, heads tilted toward Daniel as one. The 10th chair pulled out, empty, waiting. "Sit," they whispered, not with voices but with motion. All of them raised their hands in tandem and pointed to the chair. Daniel took one step back. They stood in unison, fast, too fast, their limbs jerking like marionettes yanked by invisible hands. One of them began to hum. It was the lullaby again. He turned to run, but the door was gone, replaced by a mirror, a massive one, and in it, his reflection. Only it wasn't doing what he was doing. It stood still, head cocked, smiling. Then it raised one hand, and so did the faceless figures behind him. Daniel backed away, but the mirror glowed. Words appeared, etched across the surface in bleeding letters. Ersach Kanos Wau U Remem Embr. The glass cracked once, then again, then exploded. Shards rained around him, slicing his cheek, his arms. He dropped to the floor, blood hot and fast. But the mirror hadn't shattered fully. There, left behind in the frame, was a single vertical slit. A new eye. Blinking. Watching. The faceless figures dropped their hands, one by one. They turned toward the eye, kneeled, and began to whisper in tongues Daniel had never heard. The language wrapped around him, clinging to his skin, his teeth, trying to push into him. He crawled away, dragging himself to the far end of the room, found a door that hadn't been there a second ago, and pushed it open without hesitation. It led to a stairwell again. This time going up, he climbed, and climbed, and climbed. The house stretched him longer. It wanted him exhausted, worn, desperate. Each flight of stairs took something. First, he lost the feeling in his fingers. Then he forgot the name of his first pet. Then his wedding date. Then his daughter's middle name. The house was feeding. Finally, a door. He shoved it open and fell into a room made of windows. All four walls were glass, but nothing could be seen through them. Only black. Moving black. Like worms writhing against the panes. In the center of the room, a crib. He didn't want to look, but he did. And there she was, Clara. Not the waterlogged child from before, teenage Clara, his Clara, but frozen. Pale, eyes wide open, and in her mouth, stitches. Black thread sewn tight. No, he croaked. You're not real. She's alive. You're not her. But the body twitched. Just once. Then the eyes blinked, and she sat up. Still sewn shut, she reached out her arms toward him, trembling. Then her head turned. Sharp, mechanical, and she screamed, though no sound came out. The glass walls exploded. The blackness flooded in. Daniel fell. Through darkness. Through memory. Through screams and echoes. Until he landed in a room too small to be real. A child's closet. Filled with old toys. Dolls missing eyes. Teddy bears with nails for teeth. A music box played faintly in the corner. He turned to find the door, but it was gone. And behind him, in the shadow, something breathed. Again. And then a whisper, this time deeper. More ancient. You remember her wrong. She remembers you exactly. And as Daniel trembled, as he realized how much of himself was already gone, the walls began to close. Not metaphor. Literally. The closet shrank. And in the dark, something started singing again. Only now, it was his own voice. There was something far more terrifying than monsters in the walls, voices in the dark, or faces without features. Something Daniel never prepared for. Forgetting who he was, and knowing something else was remembering for him. The closet pressed in on him from all sides, the very wood groaning like a throat trying to clear itself. His own voice continued its cursed lullaby from the shadows, disembodied and hollow, like an old cassette playing underwater. He screamed at it to stop, but the sound only grew louder. Overlapping with itself, a chorus of Daniels all singing the same twisted tune, all from different parts of his life. One voice was his at 5 years old, stuttering through the song his mother used to sing. Another was him at 18, drunk and distant. Then the one that broke him, the voice from that night in the hospital room, when he had whispered a promise to his mother as her breath slipped away. I won't forget. I'll remember everything. Liar. The closet walls moved again, closer this time. Wooden slats splintering and warping, taking the shape of gnarled hands that reached out slowly, trying to hold him in place, not to kill him, but to keep him. This was a feeding place. A place for memory to rot and mutate into something useful for the house. A souvenir of every soul it had swallowed. He clawed at the corners, the floor, the ceiling, desperate for any escape. But the closet just changed shape in response, becoming deeper, then narrower, then suddenly vast and open like the world had fallen away. He didn't land so much as arrive. Yanked through the air and dropped into a long hallway he hadn't seen before. It was lit by swinging chandeliers, their chains groaning as though they were being tugged by something heavy just out of view. The paintings that lined the walls weren't still. They moved slightly. One blink. Another opened its mouth in a silent, eternal scream. A third, the worst, showed Daniel himself, standing in the very hallway he now stood in, holding a child's hand that wasn't Clara's but still felt like her. She was looking up at him, smiling, eyes wide with trust. In the painting, he looked down at her and smiled back until his skin began to rot away in fast motion, until only his teeth remained stretched in that same grin. He turned from it, bile rising in his throat. The hallway began to tilt again. The house wasn't even trying to hide its shifting anymore. Gravity bent to its moods. He pressed on. Every door he passed groaned as if begging him to enter. One moaned lowly like it had lungs. Another cracked open to reveal a hand made of wires reaching out and twitching. He kept moving, his steps growing heavier. His legs weren't tired, they were being filled, stuffed with the memories the house didn't want anymore. With each step, he began to feel the weight of things he didn't recognize: a birthday party in 1957, the moment a man named Jonathan Garvey drowned in a lake miles away, the first scream of a girl named Maisie trapped in the basement since 1913. The house wasn't just holding memories, it was shoving them into him. Daniel fell to his knees. His nose began to bleed. Names that weren't his own tumbled from his mouth like prayers. He couldn't hold it all. And that's when she spoke again. Not from the shadows this time, from the walls themselves. "She doesn't like the noise you make." He jerked to his feet. The voice was close, soft, feminine, not a child, not the twisted version of Clara. This was something else entirely. Older, measured. Watching it echoed not just around him but within him. She was inside the walls, yes, but also inside him now. "She told me you'd break faster than the others." He ran. Not toward safety, there was none, but toward the next moment that might buy him more time to think, more time to survive. The hallway bled into a spiral staircase, carved from bone, white stone, and wrapped in chains that moved ever so slightly. As he ascended, portraits began to line the stairs, people sewn together from mismatched parts. A woman with 6 arms. A child with no face and 6 mouths across his chest. All their eyes followed him. Some blinked, one winked. At the top of the stairs, he emerged into a study. It was still, quiet, almost normal. An old desk, a fireplace burning low, bookshelves packed with dusty tomes. It was too much like the world he understood, too safe, and that's how he knew it was a trap. But on the desk, something caught his eye, a Polaroid, one he recognized. It was him and Clara, 5 years ago. They were at the pier, eating ice cream. She had it all over her nose, laughing. He'd forgotten about that day. How had he forgotten about that day? He picked up the photo and turned it over. In Clara's handwriting were the words, "You promised you wouldn't forget me." The flames in the fireplace erupted. The photo burned in his hand without catching fire, the heat biting at his fingers. From the flames, a face began to form. A woman, long black hair, mouth far too wide, skin cracked like porcelain. She stepped from the fire without a sound, her bare feet not even touching the floor. Her eyes were stitched shut, but she moved as though she saw everything. Daniel backed away, knocking over the chair behind him. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice cracked like a child's. The woman didn't answer. She glided forward, and as she did, her arms began to unravel, not stretch, but unravel, like the layers of muscle were unrolling themselves, the skin flapping like loose parchment. "You don't get to forget," she said, and her voice came from every book on the shelves, every page flipping violently on its own. Daniel turned and hurled himself through the nearest door, landing in what looked like a bedroom. He slammed it behind him, chest heaving. The room pulsed. It looked like a child's room. Toys, bed, stars stuck to the ceiling, but nothing here felt innocent. The bed was too neatly made. The dolls were turned away from him, facing the wall as if they didn't want to witness what would happen next. The closet door creaked open slowly, and out stepped a man. Only it wasn't a man. It was him. Another version of Daniel, but broken, gaunt, eyes hollow, mouth sewn shut, hair wild, fingers twitching. It raised one hand and held up a photo, another Polaroid. This one showed Daniel standing in front of Marrow House, smiling, Clara by his side. The figure began to eat the photo, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. Daniel lunged and tackled him to the ground, screaming. The two fought, mirror images locked in madness. The stitched Daniel clawed at him, nails sharp, teeth bared beneath thread. Daniel slammed his fist into its face again and again until it stopped moving. Then it dissolved. Ash. Dust. Memory erased. He staggered to his feet. The door to the hallway reopened. And from the other side, voices. Dozens of them. Every memory the house had swallowed was coming now, and it was hungry for more. Daniel turned toward the hallway, and he remembered. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know he had seen that stitched woman's face once before. On a mural. In his grandmother's attic, painted behind layers of plaster. A face no one could explain. She was older than the house. Older than the town. She was the beginning. And she had been waiting for him. Marrow House didn't just remember. It was her body. And now that he was inside, she wanted to be remembered too. The hallway stretched before Daniel like a corridor in a nightmare, longer with every step. Doors sliding silently along the walls, repositioning themselves like chess pieces. The memories the house had been feeding him now festered in his skull. They weren't his, but they lived inside him as if they belonged. He could feel the birthdays of strangers, the final moments of people long dead, the screams of those who had clawed at these same walls, just like he was doing now. Each thought felt foreign, but the emotions, the terror, were his. And through it all, one name throbbed in his ears like a splinter digging deeper, Alzora. He had no idea where he'd heard it. It wasn't in any thesis, not in the papers he'd read, not in the whispers of the locals he'd bribed for directions to the house. But the moment it slipped into his mind, the walls shivered. The temperature dropped. Something behind the plaster gasped, like an unseen mouth had finally been fed, and the name, Alzora, etched itself into his thoughts like a brand. He moved faster now, deeper into the house's bowels, his footsteps echoing louder than they should. Behind him, the door to the bedroom snapped shut, then cracked open again, slowly creaking back and forth as if it were breathing. He didn't turn around. He knew what waited behind that door. Another version of him, perhaps, or maybe something worse, something that wore his voice and his regrets like a second skin. Ahead, the hallway narrowed, funneling him toward a black iron gate, unlike anything he'd seen in the house so far. It didn't match the Victorian architecture. It looked older, more ancient. Symbols had been carved into it, symbols that shimmered under the light like they were moving, twitching beneath the surface. Daniel touched the metal, and a pulse traveled up his arm, like the gate had recognized him. Not welcomed him, recognized. The lock clicked open. He didn't use a key. He hadn't needed to. The gate swung inward on its own. Beyond it was a spiral staircase made of stone and bone, descending in tight, unnatural turns. The air was colder here, thick with a dampness that didn't feel like water. It felt like breath, like the exhalation of something vast and old sleeping just below the surface. He descended slowly, counting the steps, though he wasn't sure why. 7, 14, 21. On the 34th step, the light above blinked out, and he could hear her again, Alzora, not singing this time, not whispering, speaking. I gave them a chance, she said, her voice rolling up the stairs, old and sharp, cracked with time. Each of them, one by one. But they always lie. They promise to remember, and then they forget. Daniel stopped walking. What do you want from me? I want what they couldn't give, she replied, closer now. I want truth. The staircase ended in a chamber lit by candles embedded in the walls, hundreds of them. Each one flickered with a different colored flame. In the center of the room was a table made of flesh. It throbbed gently, veins crawling across its surface like vines. And sitting at the table was a woman. Or rather, what used to be a woman. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over her skull. Her hair was long and black, but it floated slightly, as though she existed underwater. Her mouth was stitched, not shut, but open. Threaded so the lips stayed wide, revealing teeth that were too long, too thin. Her hands were folded politely, fingers that ended in cracked nails, each engraved with names. Names Daniel knew. Names he had forgotten until now. Elias, Maisie, Jonathan, Clara. No, that wasn't right. Clara wasn't gone. Was she? Alzora looked up at him. Her stitched mouth didn't move, but her voice filled the room. You carry so many, she said. But none of them are yours anymore. You came here to listen. But now you're the one who speaks. Do you remember what you said when you crossed my gate? Daniel shook his head. You asked to understand, to hear it all, to feel the pain. And now you must. She rose, and the table split open like a mouth, inside it bones, child-sized bones, dozens. Daniel stumbled back, choking on bile. No, I didn't. This isn't what I wanted. But it's what you asked for, she hissed, voice now coming from the candles, the walls, the floor. You studied stories. You mocked the legends. You wanted to prove that this was more than myth, that it was real. He fell to his knees, hands over his ears. I didn't know it was you. You knew something. Enough to come. Enough to wake me. The chamber began to shudder, the candles dimmed, and the table began to hum, low and deep, a vibration that moved through the marrow of the room. Then the names began again, whispered from the cracks in the stone. Clara, Clara, Clara. He stood, trembling. Where is she? Alzora tilted her head. Not here. Not yet. But she follows. You left pieces of her behind. In photographs. In places that remember. In the lullabies you forgot you used to sing. Daniel's blood ran cold. I never told anyone the song, he muttered. No, she agreed. But the house heard you. And now she sings it in her sleep. The pain hit him like a hammer, sharp, raw, real. His vision blurred. He wasn't standing anymore. He was sitting in the attic of his childhood home, holding a baby in his lap. He was watching her smile up at him. He could smell the dust, the warmth of summer, the chalk on her fingers. Then the attic faded, and the bones were back. And Alzora stepped forward. She reached out, and her finger touched his forehead. It burned. A single word etched into his skin, invisible but felt. Oathbreaker. Daniel screamed. Not from the pain, but from what came next. Behind him, a door opened. Not just any door, his door. The one he'd seen in dreams since he was 7. The one he thought was imaginary. The one that had always been closed. Until now. Through the open frame was his house. Real, intact, morning sunlight pouring through the windows. The smell of coffee. The sound of Clara's laughter. She was there, on the couch, reading, whole, unharmed. He took a step forward, desperate, reaching. And Alzora whispered, If you enter, she takes your place. He froze. What? She is yours. She is still outside. But this door must be fed. Memory is never free. To leave, someone must stay. He looked back. The bones in the table trembled. Alzora stepped aside. Choose. The door began to close. Clara looked up, smiled. Daddy? His heart shattered. He ran. Toward the door. Toward light. Toward the sound of his child's voice. But just before he reached it, the house shifted, and he was gone. The door slammed shut. Alzora stood in silence, and behind her, in the bone table, a new body began to form. A man, crying, screaming, remembering. Forever. Daniel awoke not with a gasp, but with a silence so complete it pressed against his chest like a weight. He wasn't sure how long he'd been unconscious. Minutes, hours, years. Time had no meaning here, not within her. Not inside the house that had eaten history and burped up ghosts as echoes. He lay on a floor of stone that pulsed faintly, not from heat or life, but from the distant beat of something buried far beneath, as if the heart of the house still beat in its sleep, dreaming, digesting. Above him, the ceiling churned. It looked like flesh, translucent in places, with veins that shimmered faintly as dark liquid flowed through them. He pushed himself up, and the surface beneath his hands squelched, then tightened. The floor had reacted. It felt him, and in the distance he heard her again. Clara. She wasn't laughing this time. She was screaming. The sound cut through every thought, raw and frantic, echoing through unseen halls and tight crawl spaces. Daniel stumbled to his feet, the sound slicing into his chest. That wasn't a trick. That wasn't another twisted illusion crafted by Alzora. That was her. His daughter. Real. Present. Somewhere close. He ran. The corridor stretched before him. Tall and tight, made of ribs or beams. He couldn't tell. The walls breathed in sync with his panic. Rooms blinked in and out as he passed, one showing an image of Clara sleeping in her bed, another showing her alone on the school steps, forgotten, abandoned, crying. The house knew his guilt. It had tasted it. And now it weaponized it. But he didn't stop. The screams grew louder, then sharper. They turned from fear to pain. And Daniel crashed through a door with no handle, landing in a room soaked in water up to his ankles. The air smelled like rot and old nursery powder. Broken cribs floated across the flooded floor, tangled in mobile strings and bits of cloth. Dolls floated face down. Others stared upward with milky, gouged eyes. At the far end of the room, tied to a decaying rocking chair with ropes that pulsed and moved like worms, was Clara. Her mouth was free, but her arms and legs were not. Around her face, the skin of the room had peeled back, watching. Dozens of tiny eyes blinked from the walls, from the water's surface, from the ceiling. "Clara!" Daniel shouted. Her eyes found his. "Don't come near me!" she shrieked. "She's here. She's in me. She's using me." He moved anyway. Each step toward her made the water colder. The room darkened behind him. The house closed ranks. "Shut up," came another voice, from Clara's mouth. But it wasn't Clara. It was Alzora. Daniel froze. His daughter's body twisted slightly. Her eyes rolled, then centered again. "She is mine now," the voice said through her. "She came here because you called her. She wanted to find the place that broke you." She stepped too close, and I remembered her. Daniel's mind reeled. No, she wasn't. She was never supposed to come. She had to. Alzora hissed. "How else do I keep you here forever? You wouldn't stay for your own soul." But for hers. Daniel charged. The floor shifted. The water thickened. But he pushed through, grabbing Clara by the shoulders, yanking at the ropes that moved like live things. They slithered and tightened, hissing, but he didn't stop. Her eyes fluttered. "Daddy," she whispered. Then they went black, and Alzora screamed. The water erupted upward, dragging them both down. Daniel clung to Clara as the room drowned in itself. The walls bent, reshaped, shattered, and suddenly, they were outside. The night was real. Cold wind cut across Daniel's skin. Grass beneath his feet, stars above. The Merrow house loomed behind them, windows dark, silent again, its door shut tight. Clara gasped in his arms, coughing water, eyes wide, and hers again. "Daddy," she whispered. What happened?" He held her tighter than he ever had. "You came for me," he whispered. She nodded, shivering. "I couldn't let it end with you in there." He looked around. The field was silent. Still. Then he realized. The house didn't try to stop them. It let them go, and that was wrong. Daniel stood slowly, helping Clara to her feet. Behind them, the house remained unchanged. Too still. Too perfect. Then Clara spoke again. "She's not done." He turned. Clara wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at him, and her eyes, one of them wasn't hers anymore. It was black, endless, blinking, watching. Alzora hadn't been cast out. She had escaped, and she had chosen a new home. The drive back to civilization should have felt like escape, like the gasp of relief after surfacing from deep water. But as the headlights sliced through the forest road, and the last skeletal silhouette of Merrow House disappeared in the rearview mirror, Daniel felt no relief. He felt something worse than fear. Doubt. It sat in the passenger seat like fog, unseen but clinging to every breath, every blink. And beside him, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring silently out the window with her hands clutched tight in her lap, was Clara, his daughter, his blood, his reason, and something else. She hadn't spoken since they left the house. Not a word, not even when he tried to make jokes, when he begged for her to tell him how she got there, why she came. The girl who used to snap back with sarcasm and eye rolls, who wore rebellion like armor, now sat in utter stillness. And Daniel saw it in her profile, the subtle shift in her jaw, the way her breath fogged the glass differently. It wasn't just trauma. Something was wrong. He told himself she was in shock, that she'd break the silence when they hit town. But the silence didn't crack. It stretched, a tight rubber band about to snap, and then, just before the road veered toward Hollow's End, Clara finally turned to him. "I didn't follow you," she said, voice quiet, but not small. Daniel blinked. "What? I didn't follow you. I didn't get curious and sneak after you. I didn't even know where Marrow House was." Her eyes, those familiar, beautiful eyes, met his, and one of them wasn't right. It shimmered faintly. Something moved behind it. "I dreamed of it," she continued, "for weeks. A house that hums. A song that tastes like ash. I couldn't stop seeing it. And then I just woke up there. I don't remember the drive. I don't even remember leaving my room." Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles turned white. "I thought," he began, but stopped himself. What had he thought? That she'd found a journal, his notes, that she'd become obsessed with his obsession. No, she was called, just like him. No, not just like him, because of him. "I think she touched me before I even stepped inside," Clara whispered. "I think she's been touching me my whole life." Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car screeched and swerved, skidding to a stop along the roadside. Gravel crunched under the tires. The forest pressed in, black and quiet. He turned to her, breathing hard. "What do you mean?" Clara didn't answer right away. She leaned her head against the window, eyes still distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Not layered, not warped, just tired. "When I was little," she said, "I used to have this dream. I was in a room with no doors, no windows, just walls, white, and there was a woman standing in the middle, singing." Daniel's throat went dry. She had no eyes. But she watched me. She never moved, just sang. I'd wake up crying. "I never told you because I figured you weren't listening back then." Daniel winced. The truth hit harder than any horror. "She said I was the key," Clara whispered. "That if you wouldn't open the door, she'd make me?" Silence again. Daniel rested his forehead on the wheel. He didn't cry. He wanted to. But tears would have meant release. There was no release. Not here. Not with her still watching through his daughter's eye. "Can you feel her now?" he asked. Clara nodded. "She's quiet, but awake." Waiting, he sat up, started the car again. The engine sputtered to life. They drove in silence, back toward a town that had long since stopped caring about the cursed house at the edge of the woods. But peace wasn't waiting. They tried to go back to normal, or something like it. Daniel returned to his job, or at least to the shell of it. He couldn't speak of what happened. Who would believe him? His office, once cluttered with books on folklore and myth, now sat bare, the shelves empty. The framed certificates looked like tombstones. Clara stopped going to school. She said the halls were too loud. The lights hurt her eyes. She stayed in her room, blinds drawn, sketching. At first it was normal stuff, faces, hands, trees. But then the drawings changed. Daniel would find them folded under his pillow. Drawings of a woman with black hair and a sewn open mouth, always standing in the background, watching. Behind Clara, behind him. In one, the woman sat in Clara's bed, smiling with teeth like needles. In another, Daniel was drawn sleeping, his chest hollowed out, empty, ribs like an open gate. Clara claimed not to remember drawing them, and worse, she started to sing. Always the same lullaby, soft, under her breath, sometimes in the shower, sometimes while brushing her hair, sometimes in her sleep. Daniel began hearing it in his dreams. then in the hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the fan, always just beneath the surface. And the more he heard it, the more the house came back, not physically, mentally, inside. He couldn't forget the staircases that bled, the paintings that moved, the voice that filled every room like perfume. And most of all, the moment he saw the door back to the real world and ran for it, knowing full well it came at a cost. He had made a deal, even if he hadn't spoken the words. And now, the debt was coming due. One night, Daniel woke up gasping, not from a nightmare, from a sound, the lullaby, not Clara's version, hers. He stumbled out of bed, feet pounding down the hallway. Clara's room door stood ajar. Candlelight flickered inside. She sat in the center of the room, legs crossed, eyes closed. Candles surrounded her, but they weren't store-bought. They were made of wax that pulsed and moved, like veins had been poured into the mold. She was singing, and her voice was layered. Not one, not two, but 3 voices speaking through her throat. One child, one woman, and one, his own. Daniel lunged forward. "Clara!" Her eyes snapped open. They were all black now. She didn't flinch, didn't scream. She smiled. "Welcome home," she said, in Alzora's voice. Then the walls began to melt. Not literally, but perception bent. His bedroom door was gone. The hallway extended again, and far at the end, that cursed front door of Marrow House waited. Not in the woods. Here, in his home. The house had never let them leave. It had followed them. It had become them. And as the walls pulsed and the floorboards began to hum, Daniel understood the truth. He wasn't the one who escaped. Alzora did, and she brought the house with her. Daniel didn't scream. There was no air left for that. Only the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, and the dull, rising hum that now lived in the walls of his home, like a sickness blooming behind drywall. The room twisted as he stood there in Clara's doorway, staring not at his daughter, but at what had taken her. The thing that smiled through her teeth, that wore her voice like a second skin, that opened her eyes and blinked with voids instead of light. And beyond her, where the far wall of her room should have been, now stood that door. That awful, ancient door from Marrow House, with its iron hinges and the same carved warning he'd tried to forget: the house does not forgive. The house does not forget. But worse, this time, the door wasn't waiting. It was growing. The wood stretched in slow, oozing pulses, pushing through the walls of their home like tree roots, cracking through cement. The trim splintered and peeled, and beneath the wallpaper, the same symbols that lined the bones of the gate beneath Marrow House, now pulsed in black ink, as if the walls themselves were inked skin over some great living thing. Clara, or what was left of her, stood slowly, her limbs stiff as though controlled by threads. Daniel took a step back, not out of fear, but out of heartbreak. He wanted to run, yes, but the scream caught in his throat wasn't panic. It was mourning, because what he saw in her eyes for just a flicker, a sliver of a second, wasn't Alzora's possession. It was awareness. Clara was still in there, and she was watching herself be used. "Please." Daniel choked. "You don't have to do this." She tilted her head, not curious, but mimicking curiosity. "I already did," she said, and with that, the candles extinguished all at once, snuffed out by an invisible gust. Darkness took the room. Not silence, though. No, the singing returned. This time, it came from behind the door. Not a lullaby, a choir. Hundreds of voices, layered, humming in perfect unison. Each tone like a strand of thread pulling tighter around Daniel's ribs. It wasn't music. It was command. The door cracked open. Only a sliver. But what spilled through chilled him to his marrow. It wasn't wind. It was memory. The smell of dust, blood, and broken promises. The sound of nails dragging across nursery floors. The cry of a woman who had once lived and died, and waited inside the walls of a house that knew nothing of time, only hunger. Daniel backed away, but Clara moved forward. "Don't," he whispered. She blinked again, Another flicker of herself. "I'm trying," she mouthed silently. The voices behind the door grew louder, then stopped. Silence fell like a guillotine. Then came the whisper. It wasn't Alzora. It wasn't Clara. It was the house itself. "You brought her here." Daniel felt the floor buckle beneath him, not break, but bend, like the ground was breathing, exhaling centuries of grief. He dropped to his knees, as memories not his own flooded his skull. Elias Caldwell's descent into madness. The woman who walked into the basement and never found her way back up. A child locked in a wall for 42 years, singing to keep the darkness from closing in too fast. He saw all of it, felt all of it, and behind him, Clara cried, real tears. Not hers, not Alzora's, the house's. The door opened wider. Daniel didn't run. Instead, he stood and stepped forward. The room groaned around him. The temperature dropped. He reached for Clara's hand and felt the coldness there. It wasn't skin anymore. It was memory given flesh, but he held it anyway. "I'm gonna fix this," he said. She looked at him. A tear rolled down her cheek. He stepped through the door with her, and the house swallowed them whole. They stood in the great hall again, only it had changed. It no longer wore the mask of decay and rot. It had healed. Everything was pristine. Golden chandeliers lit the hall. Polished floors reflected distorted images. The staircase gleamed, and at the top, on the landing where no one ever stood, was Alzora, no longer shrouded in shadows, no longer whispering through others. She stood proud, tall, dressed in black like morning incarnate. Her eyes, stitched no more, were open now, wide and full of stars. Her mouth still gaped unnaturally, permanently pulled into a grimacing smile too wide for her face. She looked at Daniel as though she had always known him, as though he was the final thread she'd been waiting to tie her tapestry together. "You came back," she said. "Good. I hate cleaning up unfinished things." Daniel pushed Clara behind him. "I want her out," he said, his voice steady now. "No panic, just fire." Alzora tilted her head. "She's already out. I wore her like a dress, and she wore me back. That stain doesn't come off. She's a child. She's a door, Daniel," Alzora snapped. "One that you cracked open when you forgot her, when you left her pictures to collect dust, when you walked into my house and woke up the things meant to be left sleeping." Clara clutched her head. Her body trembled. "She's fighting you," Daniel said. "She still has her." Alzora laughed. It was an awful sound, like dry leaves tearing apart underfoot. "No, what she has is my echo. What you see now is just a game, a memory repeating itself. You're not here to save her." Daniel didn't wait for the rest. He charged. Up the stairs, fists clenched, rage boiling. Alzora didn't move, and when he struck her, she shattered. Not into bone, not into dust, but glass. She fell apart like a mirror dropped from a height, fragments scattering across the stairs. And in each one, reflections, not of her, of him. Dozens of Daniels, each in a different room, a different nightmare, all of them screaming. He fell backward, choking, gripping his temples. Behind him, Clara began to sing again, but it was her voice now, pure, alone, and with each note, the house cracked, the chandelier above burst, the wallpaper curled and peeled. The floors shook. She was breaking the house, with memory, with real memory, not Alzora's, not stolen ghosts. Hers, their beach trip, her first words. The night she fell asleep in his lap, watching old cartoons. She sang it all, and the house howled. Alzora's voice came from everywhere at once. "You don't get to leave me again." But Daniel stood, pulled Clara close, and sang with her, just the old lullaby. Off key. Clumsy, real, the ceiling caved in. The walls folded inward, and just before everything collapsed, a door appeared, a real door. Wood, brass handle. Home, they ran through it hand in hand, as Marrow House crumbled behind them. And then, silence. Real silence, not the waiting kind, not the bated breath kind, the kind that follows an ending. They woke on their living room floor. Daylight streamed in. The walls were clean. No door, no symbols, no hum. Clara sat up first. Daniel followed. They looked at each other for a long, long time. Then she smiled. "I think she's gone," she whispered. Daniel nodded, though a part of him would never believe it. But for now, that part could sleep, just a little while longer. 3 days passed without a sound. No singing, no shifting walls, no whispers through vents or bleeding mirrors. Just the ordinary tick of the kitchen clock and the creak of the house settling at night. Daniel stayed close to Clara, closer than he ever had before. They didn't talk much, not about what happened, not about the house or the door or the thing that wore her face. There was too much between the words for either of them to know where to start. So they settled into routine. Breakfasts made in silence. Cartoons humming in the background. Eyes scanning corners out of habit. Clara slept in Daniel's room now, tucked in with an old quilt, a nightlight humming softly beside her. At first he thought it was for her sake. Then he caught himself staring at the light, too afraid to turn it off. On the 4th night, Daniel woke up to find her gone. The quilt was still tucked neatly on the couch, the nightlight still glowing faintly blue, but Clara's spot was empty. Panic didn't come instantly. It arrived slowly, crawling into the room like the dark itself had stepped inside. He called her name once, twice, then louder. No answer. The house was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath again. He checked the bathroom, the kitchen, even outside, barefoot and shaking on the front porch as the wind hissed through the trees. Nothing. But then he saw the light in the attic window, the one that hadn't worked in years. His breath caught in his throat. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding, calling her name over and over. The attic door was open. The light inside was soft, flickering, almost candle-like. When he stepped through, he found Clara sitting cross-legged on the floor in the center of the attic, surrounded by pages. Hundreds of them, each filled with drawings. He froze. She didn't look at him, didn't blink, just stared at the drawing in her lap. "I remember all of them now," she said. Her voice was different again. Not wrong, not possessed. Just distant. Daniel stepped closer. The air up there was cold. He didn't remember it being that cold before. It bit through his shirt and into his ribs. "Ooh," he asked, kneeling beside her. Clara looked up at him. Her eyes weren't black. They were hers. But there was something behind them, something watching through the thin curtain of safety they'd built over the past few days. "The ones she showed me," she whispered. "The children. The men. The woman in the walls. I remember all their names now." She handed him a drawing. It showed a face he didn't recognize, eyes gouged out, mouth sewn open, a woman crouched in a corner of a room, holding something small in her arms. Daniel flipped the page. Another, a boy with his tongue missing, standing in a doorway made of teeth. Another, a man dragging his own shadow across a staircase, each image more twisted than the last. Clara had drawn them all. "I can't stop," she said. "If I try, I hear her. Not screaming, just humming." Daniel took her hands. They were ice cold. "We're not there anymore," he said. "We're safe now." Clara looked down at their joined hands. Her lips parted, and for a second, he thought she was going to cry. Then she said, "No, Daddy. We brought it back with us." Behind her, in the shadows of the attic, something moved. It wasn't dramatic. No grand entrance. Just a subtle shifting, like the shadow changed its mind about where it belonged. Daniel turned, slowly, dread crawling up his spine like a wet spider. The wall behind the boxes, where an old wardrobe leaned against the far corner, was bleeding. Not red, black, thick and slow. It oozed from the seams between the floorboards, from the grain of the wood from a crack in the ceiling. Then came the sound, the hum. Not loud. Not from Clara's mouth. From the walls. He stood, pulling Clara with him, and backed toward the stairs. The drawings lifted off the floor in a wind that hadn't existed a moment ago, swirling into the air like leaves caught in a storm. And then the wardrobe creaked. Daniel stepped in front of Clara. The hum grew louder. Clara pressed her face against his back. Then came the whisper, too familiar now to deny. "You left the door open." The wardrobe door burst open, but nothing stepped out, just darkness. Living, crawling darkness. It slithered across the attic floor, reaching, tasting. Daniel pulled Clara and ran. Down the stairs, past the living room, toward the front door. But when he reached for the handle, it wasn't a handle anymore. It was wood, seamless, flat. The front door was gone. Clara was right. They didn't just escape Marrow House. They relocated it, and now it had a new address. Daniel stood frozen in front of where the door should have been, his hand resting not on a knob, but on smooth, unbroken wood. The door frame was there, the hinges, even the faint outline where the door used to be. Only now it was as if it had been erased, sealed into the wall like an old scar. He turned slowly, heart racing, and saw Clara standing behind him, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wasn't crying. That was what terrified him the most. Her face was still, too calm, like she'd been expecting this, like she knew this would happen all along. "It's not a house anymore," she said quietly. "It's her." Daniel didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Alzora's name didn't have to be spoken. The memory of her voice still rang behind every corner of this place. They had carried her out like a disease sealed inside a child's cough. Disguised as memory, tucked inside Clara's mind and Daniel's guilt. He had thought the nightmare was over, that they had beaten her, escaped, broken the house. But he realized now they hadn't escaped. They'd merely moved in. The house had just changed shape. He paced the room, searching for seams, weak spots, anything. He banged on the walls, pressed against the corners, tugged at the curtains and windows. But everything was wrong. The window glass didn't reflect anything anymore. When he looked through the front window, he didn't see the yard, the street, the neighbors' lights across the way. He saw nothing. Not darkness. Not fog. Just a blank, pale void, like the space outside hadn't been created yet. Like the house wasn't just keeping them in, but had erased the outside altogether. Clara wandered into the hallway and stared at the staircase. Her fingers ran along the banister, then jerked back as if stung. Daniel rushed to her, grabbing her shoulders, spinning her toward him. "You didn't go back up there, did you?" She shook her head. "I don't need to," she whispered. "I know what's waiting." His voice broke. "What's waiting?" She glanced over her shoulder toward the ceiling. Rooms that shouldn't be, and people who aren't dead but aren't alive either. They're stuck, like flies in a web. Daniel swallowed hard. "You see them?" "Not with my eyes," she said, tapping her temple. "But they talk. Sometimes when I dream. Sometimes when I'm drawing. They're not angry. They're just lonely." He pulled her into a hug. She didn't resist. For a brief second, he allowed himself to believe this was still his daughter, untouched, whole. But he could feel it, even as he held her. There was something else in there. A presence curled deep within her bones. Dormant, patient, not trying to take over, not yet. Just watching, listening, learning how to be her. They slept on the floor that night, huddled together with every light in the house on. Daniel didn't dare close his eyes, but at some point exhaustion won. When he woke, Clara was gone again. He bolted upright. This time, there was no drawing trail, no attic door swinging open. Only a noise from the basement. He didn't remember them having a basement. There had never been a door before, but now there was, at the end of the hallway, where the linen closet used to be. A small door, heavy wood, with a rusted handle that looked like a claw. The humming was coming from behind it, and beneath the hum, breathing. Not mechanical, not human, breathing that was older than lungs. He reached for the handle. It was cold. Not icy, but dead. like touching the skin of something that had been frozen in time. He opened it. A long staircase spiraled downward into pitch black, the walls tight, carved with familiar symbols, those same twisted markings from Marrow House, looping and spiraling like language built for something with too many tongues. He descended slowly, calling Clara's name with each step. No response. Just the sound of his footsteps and the steady breath below. When he reached the bottom, he found himself in a wide chamber that shouldn't have fit beneath the house. The walls stretched too far, disappearing into gloom. In the center stood a single mirror. It was tall as the ceiling, and framed in rotting gold, and in its reflection, he saw Clara, not standing in front of it, not behind him, but inside it. Her hands were pressed against the glass, her eyes wide, her mouth moving, soundless. Then, without moving her lips, her voice filled the room. "She's learning to be me. You have to stop her." Daniel ran to the mirror and pounded his fists against it. "How do I get you out?" Her reflection didn't answer, but behind her, something stirred. A shadow. Tall, thin, crawling on all fours. It placed one long, knuckled hand on Clara's shoulder. Then the glass rippled. Clara's reflection vanished, and the mirror showed only Daniel now, staring at himself. Except he was smiling, and he wasn't. The version in the glass tilted its head and whispered, "You should have stayed in the house." Then the light bulbs in the ceiling exploded, and the room went dark, and something behind him took a step forward. Daniel didn't turn around. He couldn't. The sound behind him hadn't just been a footstep. It had been a decision. Something heavy, something old, had stepped into the room, and with it came a pressure that turned the air thick and slow. Each breath he took felt like he was inhaling syrup. The darkness clung to his skin like damp cloth. But it wasn't just darkness. It was presence. Like being inside a room with a sleeping animal that had suddenly opened its eyes. He stared into the mirror, hoping, foolishly, that Clara would return, that her face would flicker back into view, pressed against the other side of the glass. But it didn't happen. Instead, the thing wearing his smile leaned closer. Its eyes, his eyes, were wrong now, black and hollow like tunnels that had never seen daylight. Its mouth was still moving, mimicking words Daniel hadn't spoken, mouthing something over and over again. At first he couldn't tell what. Then he saw it. "She's already you. She's already you. She's already you." Daniel clenched his fists. "You're not me," he growled, trying to make his voice sharp enough to pierce the fog swallowing the room. "You're nothing. Just something the house made." The smile widened. The thing behind him exhaled. It was a sound that didn't belong to any living throat. Deep and gurgling, like air pushed through a tunnel of rot and wet leaves. Daniel finally turned, because whatever was coming for him wasn't going to wait for him to work up the nerve. At first, he saw nothing. Just the long, low chamber, walls glistening faintly in the dark, as if something slick had been smeared across them. But then, movement. The shape uncoiled from the shadows slowly, too slowly, like it had all the time in the world. It was tall, but not straight. It moved like a question mark, hunched and dragging. Its limbs bent the wrong way. Its skin looked like the thin, translucent parchment used to wrap ancient corpses, stretched too tightly across bones that didn't match. It didn't have a face, only a mouth, stitched open, just like hers. The hum began again, this time low and close. The creature didn't sing. It vibrated, and the sound twisted the air in the chamber, bending reality around its form like heat above fire. Daniel backed up toward the mirror, but the glass wasn't behind him anymore. He spun. Gone. Just a wall, flat and pulsing slightly. The house had changed again. He wasn't here to rescue Clara anymore. He was here to forget. That's what the house wanted, not to kill him. That would be too kind. Too quick. The house wanted to make him forget who he was, little by little, until he was just another part of its memory, just another echo. He ran. The thing behind him didn't follow in any normal way. It just was constantly just a few feet too close, even when he should have gained distance. The halls turned sharply, impossibly, staircases looped back into themselves, doors opened into the same room again and again. At one point he fell into a hallway of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of him. Dead, dying, screaming, clawing at invisible walls, begging for forgiveness he couldn't name. One mirror showed Clara standing next to a tall woman with black hair, holding hands. Another showed Clara becoming her. He smashed the mirrors, one after another, but the glass didn't cut him. It melted like ice, dripping to the floor and vanishing before it touched the ground. He kept running. Eventually he collapsed in a small room lit by a single, flickering lamp. Dust floated in the air, thick and slow, like he'd stepped into a memory left untouched for 100 years. There was a crib in the center of the room. A mobile turned slowly above it, though there was no air. The lullaby played again, this time from a music box resting on a chair. He didn't want to go near it. He already knew what was in the crib. But he had to look. He stepped forward, every nerve in his body screaming, and peeked over the edge. Inside was a bundle of cloth, wrapped tightly, too tightly. Something small moved beneath it, something twitching and wet. Slowly the cloth unraveled on its own, like fingers unseen were peeling it open. He stepped back as the shape revealed itself. It wasn't a baby. It was a face, his own. Eyes sewn shut, mouth forced into a smile. And then it spoke in Clara's voice. "Lay down, Daddy. She says it won't hurt if you don't move." He turned to run again, but the door was gone. There was only a wall now, and behind it, a heartbeat. Not his, not Clara's, hers. It was louder now, constant. Boom, boom, boom. The mobile began to spin faster. The music warped, notes bending into screams. Daniel dropped to his knees, clutching his head. He could feel her now, fully, completely, like a virus running through his blood. And then another voice, not Clara's, his mother's. "Daniel," it whispered. "Don't forget me again." He looked up. She stood in the corner of the room, wrapped in the same hospital gown she'd died in, her face sagging from years of forgotten grief. Behind her, the wall began to breathe, and the stitches in her mouth broke. She screamed. The crib burst into flame, and Daniel passed out before the fire could touch him, or before the memory did. When he woke, he was back in his living room. Clara sat on the couch. She was humming. The door to the basement was wide open, and from its depths, something laughed. The laughter didn't echo like a sound. It settled. Thick, like fog crawling under doorways, coiling into corners, soaking into the fibers of the carpet. Daniel sat upright on the living room floor, drenched in sweat that wasn't entirely his own. His head throbbed. Every part of him felt off balance, like his thoughts were just barely delayed from his actions. He looked at Clara sitting on the couch, legs crossed, head tilted slightly toward the open basement door. Her eyes didn't leave it. She wasn't humming anymore. Now she was just listening. Daniel stood, slowly. His joints ached like they'd aged decades overnight. The basement door remained wide open, and behind it, the stairs were visible, but they no longer looked like the unfinished wooden steps that belonged to their suburban home. These were stone, chiseled, uneven, glistening with wetness that reflected no light. The deeper he looked, the more it seemed like the stairs continued forever, spiraling down into a kind of dark that didn't belong in any physical place. That laugh still lingered. Not loud now, but present, like something had left its mouth open in the dark and forgotten to shut it. He stepped in front of Clara. "What's down there?" She blinked slowly and finally looked at him. There was still something of her in those eyes, still the shadow of his daughter, but it was flickering, like a candle near an open window. It followed us, not all of it. Just a piece, a mouth maybe, or a spine. "It's hungry." He dropped to his knees in front of her. "You're talking like you know it, like you've seen it." She smiled faintly. "I don't see it." "Daddy, I remember it." The words twisted something deep inside him. Memory had become currency inside the house, and now it was leaking, not just into them, but into reality. He looked at his living room, really looked. The walls were subtly wrong, not warped, not cracking, but alive. The shadows stretched too long. The corners seemed to shift slightly when not directly looked at. A small table that had always been by the window was now beside the stairs. Pictures on the wall showed moments that never happened. Clara at 5, wearing a blue dress he didn't recognize. Him, standing behind her, but older than he should have been. Grayer. Thinner. He stepped toward one, touched the glass. The image rippled like water and then snapped back. "Stop touching the memories," Clara said flatly. He turned sharply. "They're not real. They are now." Something moved at the bottom of the basement steps. Not a sound this time. A shape, a shift in the dark, long and low, dragging itself upward. Daniel stepped back, heart pounding. He looked at Clara. "Go upstairs," he said. "No. Clara. She won't let me." Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides, scooped her up before she could protest. She didn't fight him, but she didn't help either. She simply stared over his shoulder at the basement door as he carried her up the stairs. He could feel her trembling, but not with fear, with tension, like something inside her was waiting. He placed her on her bed. "Stay here. Don't come out. No matter what." Clara tilted her head. "What are you going to do?" Daniel looked down the stairs. "I'm going to seal the door." She didn't argue. That scared him more than anything. Back downstairs, the basement light had died. Of course it had. He moved slowly, quietly, grabbed the toolbox from the hall closet and found the hammer and nails. He started pulling a bookshelf toward the doorway. Anything to block it. Anything to delay what was inevitably coming. The humming returned, not from the basement, from inside the walls. A low, wet sound, like a throat clearing underwater. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed the house. Daniel dropped to the floor and crawled, fumbling for the flashlight in the drawer. He clicked it on. The beam was weak, shaky, but it pushed against the dark just enough to show the basement door again. It was closed. He hadn't touched it. He froze. Then a knock. 1, 2, 3, slow, deliberate, from the other side. Then a voice, but not the voice he expected. Not Alzora, his own. "Daniel," it called, quiet, almost ashamed. "You left me down here." "I didn't want to stay." He backed away, flashlight trembling in his grip. "No, you're not me. I remember everything," it whispered through the wood. "You forgot. You always forget. That's why she picked you." The door handle began to rattle, then twist, then bleed. Darkness oozed from the keyhole, thick and slow, curling down to the floor like smoke made solid. Daniel turned and ran, back up the stairs, into Clara's room. She was gone. The window was open. He ran to it and looked out. Nothing but fog. And in the center of the yard, far below, a door stood upright in the grass. Just the door. No frame, no walls. Wide open, and Clara stood at the threshold, looking back at him, smiling. "Daddy," she called. I remembered something. His knees buckled. "What did you remember?" he whispered. Clara stepped through, and the door slammed shut. Daniel didn't remember collapsing. He only remembered the sound of the door. Just a door, just a slab of wood and hinges, shutting with the weight of something ancient and final. Like a vault being sealed, like a mouth finishing a meal. When he came to, it was dawn. Pale gray light poured through the window, but it didn't feel like morning. The air was thick, unmoving. The kind of silence that usually follows a siren, or a scream. He pushed himself up from the floor, his bones aching like they remembered something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. The yard below was empty. No fog, no door, no Clara. Just wet grass and that dead, white sky. He called her name once, then again, then louder, shouting it into the wind until his voice cracked, until his throat burned. Nothing answered. Not even birds. Not even the house. Just silence, and that was worse. He stormed down the stairs, retracing every step, throwing open closets, yanking open drawers, pacing through every room of the house until it became a blur of door frames and corners and shadows that didn't behave. But Clara was gone. Utterly, completely, and horrifyingly gone. Then he saw it. In the kitchen, on the table, sat a single Polaroid. Fresh. Its edges still curling slightly from the heat of development. He picked it up with shaking hands. It showed Clara, standing in a hallway he didn't recognize. The wallpaper was blue and peeling. A grandfather clock hung above her, its hands spinning backward. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was looking at the camera like she knew he'd see the photo, like she'd left it for him. On the back, in her handwriting, one sentence. She said the door would open for you. 2. Daniel stared at the words until they blurred. Then he punched the table so hard it cracked down the center. The door. Not a door. The door. But there was no trace of it now. The yard was empty, and the basement door, once a living wound in the house's side, was gone. Just drywall now. No seams. No handle. But something in the house had changed. The walls were quieter. The hum was gone. The house felt full. Not like before when it pulsed with waiting. Now it was sated, like it had taken something in and was digesting. Clara. Clara had gone back, but not by accident. She'd chosen to. Or been led to believe she had a choice. And now it was Daniel's turn. But how? There were no doors left. He wandered the house in a daze. At some point he found himself back in Clara's room, sitting on the edge of her bed. The drawings she had made were gone. All of them. The walls were bare. The closet empty. But there was one thing left on the nightstand. A music box. He didn't remember ever owning it. It was small silver, shaped like a coffin. He lifted the lid. The lullaby began to play. But it wasn't warped. It was perfect, clear. Her voice. Clara's. Singing the same melody she used to hum in the car at bedtime, when she didn't know he was listening. It looped once, then again, and with each repetition, something stirred in the corners of the room. Not visibly, not audibly, but deeply. Something pulled at the air, tugged at the walls, and then the closet door creaked open on its own. Daniel turned slowly. Inside was nothing, just a dark square. But as he stared, the space inside began to stretch, to pull, to open. He stood. The music box kept playing. The inside of the closet was no longer a closet. It was the hallway from the photo. Blue wallpaper. Grandfather clock. Silence like velvet. He didn't hesitate. He stepped in, and the closet door closed behind him. The hallway welcomed him the way a dream does. No sudden transitions. No hard lines. He was just there. The air smelled like lavender and rot. The lights above flickered in a soft rhythm, like a heartbeat. The walls were too tall, the ceiling too low. His footsteps echoed in ways they shouldn't have, but ahead in the middle of the hallway stood Clara, still, staring at a door. Not the door, a different one. This one was made of mirrors, hundreds of tiny mirrored shards, all woven together like scales, reflecting nothing clearly, but everything vaguely. Clara, he whispered. She turned. And it was her. There were no black eyes, no hollow stare, just his daughter, pale, quiet. But still Clara, she smiled. A real smile. I told you it would open, she said. Daniel ran to her, scooped her into his arms. She hugged him back. He held her so tightly he could barely breathe. Let's go, he whispered. Let's get out of here. She looked up at him, her smile fading. I can't, she said. You can, he said, desperate now. We'll find the way. We'll fight it. Clara shook her head. I am the way now. Behind her, the mirrored door began to hum. From within, something called to him. Not a voice. Not a word. A memory. His mother. His childhood home. The night she died. The promise he broke, his failures, his shame. Every regret he ever buried whispered behind that mirrored door. "It wants me," he said, voice shaking. Clara nodded. "It needs someone to remember. Otherwise, it gets hungry again." "And you?" She looked down. "I keep it full." He staggered back. You're staying." She nodded again. "It's quieter when I'm here. I can keep it asleep, but I couldn't do it alone." The mirror cracked. A sliver of reflection showed Daniel's face, but older, hollowed, trapped. Clara took his hand. "You don't have to come through. You just have to look." The mirror pulsed once, then again, then opened. Daniel stepped forward and saw himself step in. "You said—" Daniel didn't blink. He didn't breathe. The mirror had opened not like a door swings open, but like an eye waking from a deep, unblinking sleep. The surface rippled once, showing a warped reflection of the hallway, then drew itself inward, peeling back layers of silver and glass until it revealed a space beyond it. A world that shouldn't exist. A place made of memories and rooms that had never been built. And he saw himself, not just standing there, not just staring in awe, but stepping through. Another version of him. One heartbeat ahead, already swallowed. He staggered back in revulsion, suddenly unsure of what was real. He looked to Clara, his Clara, still holding his hand, still calm, and saw the flicker again behind her eyes. That gentle shimmer of something watching through her. It wasn't all gone. She was still carrying pieces of the house. And now, it was offering him the same burden. He wanted to run. Every part of him screamed to grab Clara, find a wall to break down, claw his way out of whatever hell they'd walked into. But this wasn't that kind of trap. There were no exits, only options, and each one was a different version of surrender. The mirror pulsed again, its surface now showing not the hallway or the versions of himself, but memories, one after another. Him holding Clara when she was a newborn, terrified but proud. Her first day of kindergarten, refusing to let go of his hand. The day she turned 13 and didn't want a party. Each image sharp and warm and perfectly cruel. "I think it's feeding on them," Clara whispered. "Every time you remember, it grows stronger." Daniel nodded slowly, jaw tight. "Then we starve it." Clara's eyes widened. "If you stop remembering, you'll forget me too." "I'd rather forget than let it use us," he said. "I'll take forgetting over being part of it." The mirror cracked again, a jagged web splitting across its center. The images faded and twisted. No more warmth, no more joy. Now it showed loss. Clara in the bathtub, pale and still. Him alone in the attic, writing in blood. Versions of the future that hadn't happened. Yet, the mirror was bargaining. "Don't look," Clara said sharply. "That's how it wins." But it was too late. The mirror had started to pull, not physically, emotionally. Daniel could feel himself falling into it, drawn by the gravity of grief. 1,000 what-ifs and if-onlys, blooming behind his eyes like fire. He took a step forward. "Stop," Clara said, louder now, tugging his arm. "You're not supposed to go in." Daniel turned to her. "Then why show it to me?" "Because it's hungry. It wants you more than it wants me. It's tired of children." He dropped to his knees, head in his hands. "Then what do we do?" Clara sat beside him. The mirror's glow flickered across her face, casting long, strange shadows. "You make a choice," she said. "You walk away, and I keep it asleep. Or you go in, and we keep it locked together. But if you go in, you don't come back the same. Or at all." Daniel raised his head, eyes stinging. "Why you?" "Because I didn't break the promise," she said gently. "You did." Those words hit him like a blow. The years of forgetting, of drifting away from her, buried in his work, hiding in studies and journals and legends to avoid the pain of living. She had always been right there, and he had looked past her. Now, the house had made that mistake permanent, had grown inside it, had built a kingdom from guilt. The mirror began to hum again, deeper this time, inviting. Clara placed her small hand over his. "I'll be okay," she said. "I know how to make it sleep." Daniel stood slowly, chest rising with sharp, shallow breaths. He turned to the mirror again. It showed him now, and only him, this version, in this moment. Tired, broken, real. He walked forward. Clara's voice stopped him. "If you go, I'll wait. As long as I can." He nodded once, then stepped into the mirror. The air folded around him like wet cloth. Sound vanished, gravity changed. He didn't fall, he shifted. And then, nothing, no floor, no sky, just dark. But he felt her hand again. Not Clara's, hers. "Alzora, you took your time," she whispered. "But they always come back in the end." Daniel opened his eyes and saw the house. Not Marrow House, not his home, but the true one, built from memory, held together by every forgotten promise, every abandoned child, every door left open too long. And at the center, Clara, waiting, but not for rescue, for the next person to remember her. Daniel didn't scream as he fell into the house. There was no wind, no impact, no sensation of falling in the traditional sense, just an unraveling, a slow peeling of self, as if every layer of his identity was being lifted, inspected, and filed away. First his name slipped away, then his voice, and finally the warmth in his chest that had once answered to the word father. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was erasure, slow and surgical. When he landed, it was soundlessly, on a floor that wasn't there, in a room that wasn't lit. The darkness wasn't empty. It was expectant, waiting, like a breath held too long. He stood, or at least he thought he did. There was no weight to his body, but he could still feel it somehow, like a forgotten coat he'd once worn. All around him, the house pulsed faintly. Not with light, but with intention. The walls were made of shifting memory, constantly rebuilding, folding and collapsing like paper sculptures. He saw flashes in them, snapshots of lives that may have never happened. A child standing in the snow, a man hanging from a rope in an attic, a girl at a train station, waving goodbye to a mother she'd never see again. The house didn't decorate with furniture. It furnished itself with memory. And the deeper Daniel walked, the more the memories bled. A hallway swallowed him, lined with doors that whispered. One hissed his name. Another murmured apologies in his mother's voice. Yet another sang to him, Clara's lullaby, warped and slowed, dripping like syrup. The temptation to open them clawed at his hands, but he knew better. This wasn't a maze. This was a feeding ground. Every door was a mouth. Every whisper was a hook. He pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, until he reached the center. There was no ceiling, no walls, just a vast, circular space stitched together from the insides of everything he'd ever forgotten. In the center stood a table, wide and long, set for dinner. But the plates were cracked mirrors, and the glasses filled with tears. Seated around it were versions of himself, dozens. Some looked older, some younger, some missing eyes, tongues, or entire limbs. All of them turned to look at him in unison. One stood. He looked nearly identical to Daniel, save for the long black thread trailing from his mouth like a leash. "Welcome," he said, though his lips didn't move. "You've finally remembered enough to see." Daniel's voice came out ragged. "See what?" The other Daniel smiled. "The truth. You were never supposed to leave. None of us were." From the shadows beyond the table came the hum. It grew steadily, like boiling water rising to a scream. Then she stepped forward. Alzora, not cloaked, not monstrous, but whole, beautiful in a way only things that have never been human can be. Her skin was porcelain pale. Her hair fell around her like wet ink. Her eyes were mirrors. Daniel saw himself reflected in both, and in neither. She walked barefoot across the shifting ground, leaving no footprints. But each step made the house groan like it was remembering her weight. "You came willingly," she said. "I came for Clara." Alzora tilted her head. "And you found her. But that was never the end, Daniel. That was just your price of entry. Daniel felt the weight of her words press into his chest. She's still mine, Alzora added, gently. But now, so are you. He shook his head. No, you don't get to keep us. Not anymore. Her smile didn't fade. I don't need to keep you. I just need you to stay. And the truth is, you want to? The table behind him laughed in many voices. You want to understand? Alzora continued. You want to know why the house waits, why it watches, why it remembers. Daniel closed his eyes. Because it's made of us? Not just you, she whispered. All of you. The forgotten, the abandoned, the broken promises and the quiet betrayals, the lullabies sung once and never again. I'm not the villain, Daniel. I'm the echo. Something moved beside him. He turned. Clara stood there, not as she was, but younger, maybe 6, maybe 7, holding the hand of someone he didn't recognize at first, until he looked closer. It was her, Alzora. Only not yet, not fully formed. She was young too once. There was sadness in her eyes, confusion, love, a child forgotten by time, clutching a memory so hard it cut her open. Clara looked up at him. She said if I stayed, you'd come find me. She said we'd be together. Daniel's knees buckled. He dropped to the ground, reaching for her. We are together. Clara didn't move. But I don't want to forget anymore, and she doesn't want to be forgotten either. Alzora knelt beside them, voice soft. You don't need to go. Stay. Become the memory. Daniel looked into Clara's eyes. She was still in there. So was he. All of them. The house wasn't a prison. It was a record. A terrible, living library of every truth no one wanted to keep. But someone had to. He stood slowly, turned to Alzora. Then let me take your place. The mirrored eyes blinked. The hum stopped. Even the walls seemed to pause. I remember enough now, he said. More than enough. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. The ground beneath him opened, not like a trapdoor, but like acceptance. And Daniel fell again. Not screaming, not afraid, but remembering, always remembering. Above him, Clara watched. And for the first time in a long time, she was just a child again. She turned and walked out of the house. Clara didn't look back. Not when the hum stopped. Not when the mirrored eyes blinked for the last time, and not when the floor beneath her father opened like a sigh. She didn't have to look. She felt it. The weight lift from her bones. The tether around her ribs snapped loose. Whatever part of her Alzora had embedded into, whatever fragment of her memory the house had been feeding on, it was gone now. Not lost. Taken. Daniel had offered himself in its place. He hadn't screamed when he fell. That was what stuck with her. Not the fall. The silence. The peace in it. The hallway faded around her. The blue wallpaper peeled itself away into the void. The grandfather clock collapsed into dust. The floor under her feet changed, softened. She stepped once, then again. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the house. She was standing in the middle of her bedroom. It was daylight. Not the dull, gray fog of before, but warm sunlight, real light, pouring through the window like a welcome. The music box on her nightstand was closed. The hum was gone. The house was quiet in the way home should be, not in the way haunted places hold their breath. She stood in place for a while, unmoving, listening. Nothing. No whisper. No pull. She walked downstairs. The living room was exactly as they had left it the first night they'd come back. Couch cushions rumpled. The TV off. The blanket on the floor. But everything had a stillness to it that felt permanent. Not staged. Not artificial. As if the house itself had exhaled after holding its lungs too tight for too long. She stepped outside. The street was normal. Cars drove past. The neighbor's dog barked once before retreating behind a fence. Across the road, Mrs. Greer watered her flowers. None of them knew what had happened. None of them could feel the weight that had been here, the way the very air had bent around them. It had only touched Clara and Daniel. And now, only Clara remained. She sat on the front steps and looked at the sky. It felt thinner, like reality had stretched to let something pass through and hadn't quite settled back. She didn't cry. There was no scream, no collapse. She just sat. Inside her head, the memories shifted, not fading, not erased, but reshaped. The time she and her dad had gone to the beach when she was 6. The ice cream that had melted too fast. The thunderstorm that came out of nowhere. The way he had wrapped her in his hoodie and carried her all the way back to the car. She remembered that now, clearly, for the first time in years. And not just that day, all of them, every birthday, every bedtime story. Every time he tried to be better even when he didn't know how. The house hadn't taken those from her. He had. And now, by stepping into the heart of it, he'd given them back. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The wind shifted slightly. A breeze moved through the trees. And for a moment, just one brief, fragile moment, she thought she heard a lullaby. Off-key, clumsy, real, then it was gone. Far below in the rooms no one sees, in the place beneath all memory, the house stood silent. At its center, Daniel sat at the long table, alone. The others, his reflections, the fragments of other selves, were gone, only him. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't trapped. He was home. Alzora stood across the table, her mirrored eyes dimmed, her body still, not speaking, just waiting. Daniel nodded once. "I remember," he said. "Not everything, but enough." The house didn't hum. It rested. And Daniel, its new heart, closed his eyes. The doors would stay shut. Until someone else forgot something they shouldn't have. Until someone else left a memory behind. Until the house woke again. The house sat quiet on the corner of Langley and 3rd, unremarkable from the outside. A standard 2-story home with weather-worn shutters and a cracked driveway, just like a dozen others on the block. The neighbors barely noticed it anymore. It had been quiet for weeks. No police tape. No strange lights in the windows. Just silence. Clara still lived there, alone now, though no one really asked why. They whispered, of course. About the father who had disappeared. About the girl who had changed. But people don't ask direct questions when they're afraid the answer might come with consequences. Clara went through the motions. School. Groceries. Reading on the porch when the weather allowed. But every so often, when the wind hit just right, or the pipes moaned in the night, she would pause and tilt her head, listening. The silence that had once wrapped around the house like a vice was still there, but it had depth now. Texture. It wasn't just quiet. It was waiting. She spent more time in the attic now. Not because it whispered or revealed things, but because it was hers. The place where she had once been hollowed out, now refilled. She kept the drawings in a locked box beneath the floorboards. The pages were still alive in a way that unnerved her, the ink never truly drying. Faces moved when she wasn't looking. Shadows inside the sketches shifted when her back was turned. But they never called to her. Not anymore. Because Clara understood something no one else did. She had been through the house. She had left a piece of herself behind. But more importantly, someone else had stayed. Her father was still down there, somewhere, far beneath the floorboards of this reality, keeping it closed, holding the house's hunger in check. She felt him sometimes like a tug at the edge of her thoughts. Not words. Not dreams. Just presence. The kind that you don't notice until it's gone. She knew if she let herself forget, really forget, then it would find its way back. The house didn't die. It waited. It fed on absence. So Clara remembered. Every day, she said his name before school. She whispered the lullaby before bed. She never let the silence get too deep, because in the silence, it listens. 3 towns over, in a small suburban house built just last year, a boy named Peter began to dream of doors. It started small. He would wake in the night, unsure why, his mouth dry, his heart racing. He told his parents, who said it was just growing pains. But then the dreams became more vivid. Always the same hallway, Always the same door at the end, smooth, black, and breathing. Peter had never heard of Marrow House, had never met Clara. But the dreams grew sharper, more persistent. One night he drew the door without meaning to. The next morning his closet door creaked open on its own, and behind it, just for a moment, he saw a staircase spiraling downward into blackness, etched with symbols he didn't understand. He told himself it was just a nightmare, closed the door, and forgot. But in the attic of Clara's home, the ink in the drawings began to twitch. The house stirred. Daniel, deep below, opened his eyes and smiled. Because forgetting is the first key, and the house remembers everyone who leaves the door cracked open. It was a Tuesday when Peter's dreams shifted from mere suggestion to memory. Not his memory, he knew that much. These images, these feelings, they didn't belong to him. But when he closed his eyes, they were real. A corridor with no ceiling, just endless sky where the stars spun too fast. A staircase built from teeth. And always, always, that door at the end. Not black anymore, but mirrored, pulsing faintly as if breathing. For days, he ignored it. Kids his age had nightmares all the time. But this wasn't fear. Not really. It was familiarity, a longing he didn't understand. A sense that he was supposed to remember, even if he couldn't. Peter was 11, quiet, not the sort who made waves. His teachers described him as soft-spoken and smart. But distracted. His parents called him sensitive. The kind of child who stared too long at cracks in the wall or asked questions about death before he was old enough to know the word grief. But ever since they'd moved into this house, a crisp, clean build at the edge of a suburb freshly carved from former forest, he hadn't been quite right. The house was new. Too new. No squeaky floors, no history, no smell of aging wood or the secret sighs of settling walls. Yet something about it felt ancient, lived in. Not in the way a home carries echoes of joy and loss, but in the way something pretends to be comfortable, like skin worn by something else. On the third night, Peter woke up sitting upright in bed, hand outstretched toward the closet door. He hadn't opened it, but he'd wanted to, and that terrified him more than the dream itself. By Friday, the door in his dreams no longer waited at the end of a hallway. It waited behind him, always just out of sight. He'd feel it there, breathing, whispering, remembering, and he'd turn around and wake up before he could see it. And each morning, something small would be different in his room. Once, the curtains had shifted, slightly ajar when he was sure he'd closed them. Another time, a toy he hadn't touched in years was sitting in the middle of the floor. Yesterday, the light bulb in his closet had burned out, even though he hadn't turned it on in months. His parents didn't notice. Or if they did, they said nothing. People rarely do when the house chooses someone else. Clara noticed. She had felt it the moment the boy's dream touched the outer edge of memory. The house hadn't truly awakened, not yet, but it had stirred like a sleeping dog twitching in its sleep. Her drawings grew hot that night, not burning, not scalding, just warm enough to let her know it was watching again. She stood barefoot in the attic, holding one of the drawings to her chest, breathing carefully, trying not to think the name, because the house wasn't the only thing listening. "Dad?" she whispered. Just once. Nothing answered. But the attic light flickered. That was enough. She knew what it meant. Someone else had found the door. She spent the next morning searching online. Not for Peter. She didn't know his name yet, but for symptoms. Strange dreams. Sudden obsessions with doors or staircases. She scanned forums, Reddit threads, old blogs that hadn't been updated in a decade. In one, buried deep in a forgotten thread titled, "Homes That Remember," she found a post dated just 3 days ago. "My kid's been having nightmares since we moved. Dreams about a door, always the same. Mirrored. Sometimes he talks in his sleep, says things like, 'I don't want to forget.' He's 11. He doesn't have anything to forget." Clara copied the username. She didn't reply. Some things worked better in silence. Instead, she drew, for the first time in weeks. The lines came fast, urgent, shaking with recognition. When she finished, she had a face. A boy with large eyes and a nervous mouth. She didn't know how she knew what he looked like, only that the house had already begun remembering him, and now so could she. She folded the paper once and tucked it into the music box. The song played on its own. Peter's parents were arguing again. Not loudly, not even angrily. But something about their tone had changed. Like they were reading lines off a script that neither of them understood. "He's fine," his mother said. "Just needs to adjust. Kids have wild imaginations." "Yeah, but this," his father replied. "He said the house is whispering to him. That it knows his name. He's trying to scare us. You saw that movie with him last month. It's probably stuck in his head." Peter sat upstairs, the closet door open. Not wide, just enough. He didn't remember opening it, but he didn't close it either. The whispering was faint tonight, but more direct. Words came clearer. Names, places, promises. "We won't forget," it said. "We'll keep you. We'll keep you whole." That word, whole, made his skin crawl. There was something deeply wrong about it. Like the house didn't understand what humans were made of. Like it wanted to wear him, but hadn't yet figured out how. He closed his eyes and dreamed again. But this time, he wasn't alone in the hallway. There was a girl, older than him, 15, maybe 16. Her eyes heavy with something deeper than sadness. "Don't open it," she said. He blinked. "What's behind it?" "A mirror. That's not scary. Not until it tells the truth." Peter stared at her. "Who are you?" She looked away. "I left the door once, and someone stayed behind for me. Now I watch. I remember. So the house doesn't take anyone else." He stepped toward the door. The girl grabbed his hand. "Please." He woke up screaming. His parents never came. But in the morning, there were footprints on the carpet, bare, small. They led from the closet to his bed, and back. That night, Clara stood in the park across from Peter's house. She had followed the energy, if it could be called that, all the way to this place. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the boy. He had become a beacon. She didn't know why. Sometimes the house chose at random. Other times it followed bloodlines or patterns of grief. But this child was special. The pull around him was magnetic. She didn't approach. Not yet. She just watched. Waited. If the house had touched him this deeply already, then time was short. She walked home barefoot, carrying the sketch of his face close to her chest. Up in the attic, the air smelled like dust and salt. She placed the sketch on the floor. The music box clicked open. The lullaby played backward, and the room darkened. She didn't flinch, just whispered, "He's too young." A voice, low and old, replied, "So were you." In the following days, Peter stopped eating. His eyes developed shadows beneath them that no 11-year-old should carry. He rarely left his room. His drawings changed. At first, just the door. Then the staircase. Then the mouths in the walls. Then, her. The girl from his dream. He drew her standing in front of him, one hand outstretched, the other holding a key that blawed. His parents found the drawing and finally decided to act. But the moment they tried to leave the house, the car wouldn't start. And when they tried to book a hotel, every confirmation email vanished before their eyes. Then the power began to fail. And finally, the lights flickered, and the mirror in the bathroom cracked. Peter didn't scream when the door appeared in the center of his room. Not behind a wall. Not in his closet. Just there. Freestanding. Mirrored. Breathing. But this time, he didn't open it. Because Clara was already there. Standing between him and it. "You don't belong to it," she said. Peter whispered, "But I think it remembers me." She knelt beside him. "Then we make sure it forgets." The mirror pulsed. Clara stood. Faced it. and for the first time in weeks, the door did not open, because something stronger than memory had come to the threshold. Purpose. The house did not hum. It hesitated. Clara smiled. "Good," she whispered. "You're afraid." Behind the door, something groaned. Something ancient. The mirror surface cracked. Peter screamed. But when he looked again, Clara was gone, and so was the door. Only her sketch remained, drawn in charcoal and salt, and on the back in neat, childlike handwriting. "I'm still remembering. You keep forgetting. Don't let it in." Peter tucked the sketch under his pillow, and for the first time in a week, he slept without dreaming. But far away, in a room with no walls and a sky made of stitched memories, Daniel stirred. Because even when the door closes, the house keeps listening. And another child had just learned its name. Peter didn't wake with a scream that morning. There was no jolting upright in bed, no sweat-soaked sheets, no breathless panic. Instead, he opened his eyes like any other child waking for school. Slow, bleary, uncertain of where dream ended and morning began. But this morning, unlike the others, he knew something had changed. The air in his room was too still. Not dead, not heavy, just paused, like the world outside the walls was waiting for him to move first. He slid out of bed cautiously, his feet cold against the hardwood. The sketch of the girl, Clara, was still tucked under his pillow, though the edges had begun to yellow like something ancient. He didn't remember doing it, but during the night, he'd drawn more. The floor beside his bed was scattered with pages. All charcoal, all doors, some cracked open, some with hands stretching through, others showing only eyes. But the worst of them, the one he couldn't stop staring at, was different. It showed his bedroom. Drawn from above, like a bird watching from the ceiling, he was in the center of the room, curled in bed. And behind him, in perfect, sickening detail, was the mirror door. But in the drawing, it was open. Peter looked at the wall where it had stood just a night ago. Gone, not a trace, not even a mark on the floor. But the silence was louder today. Downstairs, his mother hummed in the kitchen. A tune he didn't know. A song she didn't realize she was humming. The same 3 notes over and over. Peter sat on the stairs for a long time, listening, letting the sound wash over him. It was strangely soothing, until the rhythm faltered. She stopped mid-hum, mid-note. He waited for her to resume. She didn't. Instead, she said his name, not like a question, not like she was calling him to breakfast, just his name, as if tasting it. Peter. He stepped carefully down the remaining stairs, gripping the railing like it might disappear. When he reached the kitchen, she was standing with her back to him, perfectly still. The smell of eggs hung in the air, untouched, forgotten. "Mom," she turned around. Her eyes were normal. Her smile was not. Too wide, too patient. And for a heartbeat, they stood like strangers. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. She blinked, startled. "Oh, sweetie, I didn't hear you. Hungry?" Peter nodded slowly, though something deep inside him whispered that wasn't his mother. Not anymore. Or maybe not entirely. That evening, when his father came home, he found every mirror in the house turned to face the walls. Every single one. Even the one in the hallway closet, which hadn't been touched in years. When he asked why, Peter just shrugged. "They're watching again," he said. "They remember too much." His father laughed nervously. "You've got quite the imagination, buddy." But that night, the hallway mirror cracked down the center, and the laughter stopped. Clara wasn't resting. She didn't get that luxury anymore. Since stepping between Peter and the door, she hadn't truly slept. She drifted sometimes, eyes closed, body still. But her mind never left the house. It lingered at the edge of that impossible architecture, always watching, always ready. Because she knew something now. Something Daniel hadn't known when he gave himself to it. The house didn't just feed on the forgotten. It remembered back. It held memories like a gallery, not just preserving them, but curating them, choosing what to display, what to distort, and what to send back out into the world as bait. She sat in her attic, knees drawn to her chest, the sketchbook open in her lap. The newest page was blank. She hadn't drawn Peter again. She didn't have to. His story was in motion now. But there was another image burning behind her eyes. Her father. Still inside. Still watching. Still remembering so she didn't have to. But that connection was thinning. The more the house stirred, the more Clara felt the gaps in her mind. Memories vanishing. Moments slipping away like ash in water. She couldn't lose them. Not now. Not when the house was reaching through children again. She whispered into the attic air, "I need you." And from somewhere deep below the floorboards of reality, something stirred. Not Daniel, something older, something that had been sleeping beside him. The house itself. Peter stopped talking by Sunday, not out of fear, out of necessity. Words drew attention, and attention fed the door. His parents argued in whispers now. He heard them through walls, heard them question his sanity. Their own. The electricity had grown unreliable. Light bulbs flickered when he passed. The dog next door howled when he looked out the window. And now, sometimes when he blinked too long, the world around him stuttered, like an old VHS tape losing signal. That night, the power finally went out. Total darkness. Peter didn't scream. He simply turned on the flashlight he had tucked under his bed and sat in the center of his room, waiting. The closet door creaked. Not open. Just breathed. A long, slow inhale. Peter held the sketch of Clara tightly. "Don't come back," he whispered. "You already saved me." But she did come back. Just not alone. The mirror door reappeared slowly, not all at once. First, the sound, a low hum, like teeth grinding underwater. Then the shimmer in the air. Then the shape. This time, it didn't reflect him. It reflected her. Clara. But not as she was. This Clara had no eyes. Just blank, smooth skin where sight used to be. And her mouth was sewn shut. Peter stood his ground. "You're not her." The figure tilted its head. From the seam of its mouth came a sound. A scraping. Like nails on glass. And behind it, the house spoke. Not in words. In reminders. Peter's grandmother's funeral. The time he let his best friend take the blame. The night he thought about running away. The door fed him himself. And waited for the guilt to do the rest. But Peter had already learned. This was how it worked. It showed you what you hated. What you couldn't change. What you wanted to forget. And it begged you to let it hold those things for you. Clara had told him the price. He turned away. Faced the real Clara's drawing. Held it like a talisman. "I choose to remember." The mirror cracked. The hum died. The figure shuddered. And the door disappeared. This time, for good. Clara opened her eyes in the attic, breath ragged. A voice whispered from the edge of her skull. "Daniel." Faint. Far. "But there, I remember you," she said softly. And for now that was enough. Because the house might whisper. It might lure. It might even reach through glass and skin and shadow. But it could not force. Not if they remembered. Not if they chose. And somewhere, deep beneath the world's skin, in the chambers where all forgotten things gather, the house closed its eyes again, waiting for the next open door, the next broken promise, the next child who stopped remembering why the shadows felt so familiar. Clara was dreaming again. At least, she thought she was. But dreams usually unravel when you try too hard to hold on to them. This didn't. This clung to her like wet sheets, wrapping around her ribs and soaking into her skin. She stood at the top of a staircase that shouldn't exist, lit by lanterns filled with flickering insects. The walls bled quietly, not blood, but color, reds, yellows, oranges draining from unseen paintings. Below her, the staircase spiraled into blackness, pulsing like the inside of a lung. She knew this place, not from memory, from absence. This was where things went when you forgot them. Where every lost sock, every unfinished lullaby, every dismissed apology tumbled down to rest forever. But now, The place was alive, and it had started rearranging itself. The house wasn't dormant anymore. It was restless, and Clara could feel it inside her bones, humming like a second heartbeat. She took a step forward. The stairs didn't creak. They sighed, and she descended. The deeper she went, the more the air changed, not colder, quieter. Sounds didn't echo here. They just stopped. Her footsteps faded behind her the instant she moved. Her breath came in silent bursts. Even her thoughts felt muffled, like someone else was filtering them before they reached her own head, but she had to go deeper. Something had broken loose, something new. She didn't know if Peter had triggered it, or if it had simply been waiting, building pressure over time. Either way, it had cracked the surface, and now memories were leaking, not hers, not Daniel's, not even the house's. Something older, something buried. At the bottom of the staircase was a door. Unlike the mirrored ones or the breathing ones or the ones that bled shadows, this door looked normal. White, flat, brass knob. It might have belonged to a pantry. That somehow made it worse. She reached out and turned the knob. It opened with a sound like bones clicking together. Beyond it was the memory room. It had no walls, no ceiling, just shelves. Endless, reaching shelves stacked with jars. Each jar was filled with something different. Mist, spiders, feathers, tiny screams. Some pulsed, others wept. All of them were labeled in jagged handwriting that shifted if you looked too long. Clara stepped inside. No footsteps here. The floor was mist. She passed the first row of shelves and paused. One jar in particular seemed to shudder at her presence. She leaned closer. Inside was a tiny, flickering figure. Herself, at 5 years old, crying behind a door she couldn't open. The label read, UYOUHUHTHEFOGUSATTYDID. She reached for it instinctively, but her hand passed through the glass. A whisper burned across her skull. You can look, but not keep. This is where you leave things, not find them. She turned around. Daniel was standing in the mist, or at least a version of him. His face was older, not in age, but in weight. Eyes dark, mouth thin, clothes stitched from parchment and ink. You're not him, she said. The figure nodded. No, but close. I carry his echoes. Then where is he? Deeper? Clara hesitated. Can I reach him? Only if he remembers you. And he's starting to forget. That cut deeper than any blade. She clenched her fists. Then I'll remind him. The figure stepped aside. Follow the things you gave away. That's where he's going. And just like that, it was gone. Clara walked deeper into the room. The jars began to shift. The labels no longer described memories. Now they whispered names. Ellie, age 7, who remembered her twin after the crash. Jonas, age 10, who forgot his mother's face. Myra, age 14, who gave the house her voice to keep her brother safe. Each name burned into her skin as she passed, and still she kept walking. Until the shelves ended, and the floor dropped out. She fell, but she didn't land. She arrived, back in the house. But not in the attic, not in any known room. This was the foundation. The space that existed before the walls, before the blueprints, before people started calling it a house at all. She stood in a field of mirrors, thousands of them angled toward the sky. Above her, there was no ceiling, only a massive open eye. It blinked once. The mirrors rippled, and from each surface a figure stepped out. Children, hundreds of them, silent, pale, watching. At the center stood Daniel. Clara ran to him, but he didn't move. Didn't recognize her. She stood inches from his face and whispered, "Dad, I'm here." No reaction. She took his hand. It was cold, dead cold, but his fingers twitched. She pressed her forehead to his and began to remember. Out loud, "The beach," she said. "The time you lost your keys and we stayed out until dark. Nothing. The time you built me a cardboard castle because I said I hated my room. Still nothing." She screamed now, weeping. "The time I got sick and you slept on the hospital floor for 3 nights because you didn't want to leave me. His eyes blinked. Once. Slow, he exhaled. And the mirrors shattered. All around them, children screamed, not in fear, but release. The sky eye blinked again, and closed, and Daniel looked at her. Truly looked. Clara, he whispered. Then the ground shook, and from the space beneath shattered glass and broken memory, the true heart of the house began to rise. It wasn't a room, or a door, or even a thing. It was a hunger, a shape made of need. It rose like a storm cloud, all teeth and shadows, moaning with the grief of a million forgotten souls. Daniel turned to Clara, eyes wide. We woke it. She nodded. And now, when we either feed it, he held her hand, or we starve it. The house screamed, and the mirrors began to reform. But this time, Clara and Daniel were inside them. Not trapped, not broken, just remembered. And the house, for the first time in its long, dark life, didn't know what to do with that. The mirrors didn't reform all at once. They rebuilt themselves like thoughts returning after years of repression. Slow, uncertain, jagged around the edges. Clara watched her reflection fracture and scatter in every direction, each shard containing a version of her that was slightly off. One smiled a little too wide. Another cried blood. A third mouthed words she couldn't hear, but instinctively feared. Daniel stood beside her, breathing hard, fists clenched like he was holding onto his name with every ounce of will he had left. They weren't in the house as they had known it. This was deeper. Older. It was the intention behind the house, the blueprint carved into some hidden fold of reality where the forgotten didn't just rest, they were processed. Clara could feel it in her bones now. This was where the house decided what to keep, what to distort, what to send back, because it wasn't just about memory, it was about control. Daniel turned to her. I'm starting to forget again. No, she said, grabbing his face with both hands. Stay with me. You remembered once, you can remember again. But his eyes fluttered, and for a second he was gone, not unconscious, not absent, just overwritten. A newer version of him stood there, flickering like bad reception, one who didn't know Clara, didn't know the house, didn't know anything except the script the house had fed him. Then he was back, gasping like he'd broken through ice. Clara's heart sank. It's trying to erase you. Daniel nodded. Piece by piece. We have to get out. Out isn't enough anymore. That's when the laughter started. Not human. Not monstrous either. Mechanical. Precise. Calculated. The mirrors began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, turning like gears in a machine whose purpose was never meant for comprehension. And as they spun, the landscape changed. The ground beneath them cracked and folded into corridors. Rooms assembled like origami, walls unfolding, staircases twisting into being. Clara turned, trying to find a fixed point. There were none. The mirrors had birthed the room that never ends. She had heard of it in whispers, scrawled in the margins of the oldest sketches, drawn with red chalk and hidden under floorboards in the attic she'd once claimed as sanctuary. The room that never ends wasn't a place. It was a punishment, the place you were sent when you understood too much. We shouldn't be here, Clara said, trembling now. Daniel's voice was quiet. But we are. A door opened behind them, and a man stepped through. He was bald, tall, skin like paper that had been soaked and dried too many times. His eyes were stitched shut, but he moved with perfect certainty. He wore a coat made of pages, literal pages stitched together by thin wires, and each page bore a memory. Clara could feel them leaking off of him. Birthdays, betrayals, murders, first kisses, dead siblings. Some of the pages were blank, but bled at the corners. I am the archivist, he said in a voice that sounded like turning pages in an empty library. Neither Clara nor Daniel spoke. He stepped forward. You entered the wrong room. This place is not for the living, not for the dead, not for those who seek. Daniel squared his shoulders. We didn't seek it. It found us. The archivist tilted his head. That's worse. The pages on his coat began to shift, rearranging, rewriting. Clara's name appeared, then Daniel's, then a third name, one she didn't recognize, but it echoed in her head like something she should know. Elias. She blinked. The name made the room vibrate. The archivist frowned. That name has been sealed. Clara stepped forward. Who is he? You are not permitted to know. I already do? That is a lie. No, she said, staring straight into the stitched eyes. It's a memory I'm not supposed to have. That doesn't mean it's not mine. The ground cracked beneath them. A scream rose, not from any mouth, but from the walls. The room that never ends doesn't like contradiction. It punishes rebellion. The floor dropped. They fell, but they didn't land in pain. They landed in a house. Clara's house, but wrong. Everything was reversed. Left was right, up was down. Pictures showed people with faces she couldn't quite process. Colors were off. Not unnatural, just slightly wrong. As if the house had been described to someone else, and they had recreated it from memory with unfamiliar crayons. And sitting at the kitchen table was Elias. Not older, not younger, exactly Clara's age, eyes wide, mouth shut, waiting. Daniel staggered toward him. You, who are you? Elias didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at Clara. She stepped forward. Do I know you? She asked. He smiled faintly. You forgot me? You had to? Why? To stay safe. To let the house take someone else instead. The silence that followed was razor sharp. Clara felt her knees buckle. No, she whispered. I wouldn't. You didn't mean to, Elias said gently. But you did. Daniel looked at her, unsure. Who is he? Clara clutched the edge of the table. My twin. The word hit like thunder. The room began to shake, not violently, but resonantly, as if it agreed, as if it remembered too. You're not supposed to be here, Elias said. But you're still inside. I've always been. Then why haven't I seen you until now? Because now the house wants you to. Daniel stepped between them. Why? Elias turned his gaze to him. Because she has to choose. Between what? Elias looked sad now. Between me and you. The lights exploded. The door behind them swung open. The archivist waited there. But this time, the pages of his coat were burning. The memory of Elias was no longer safe. And the house, it wanted balance. Clara stepped back. No, she said. I'm done choosing. I chose my father once. Now I choose myself. The archivist stepped forward. That is not permitted. Clara screamed, not words, but memories. She threw them at him. The day her brother vanished, the guilt, the silence, the way her mother stopped saying his name, the way the house only took one child, the way Clara never asked why, the way she never remembered until now. The pages on the archivist's coat blackened, curled, fell, and the house roared in pain. It didn't like being reminded of its own thefts. Daniel grabbed Clara's hand. Elias grabbed the other, and all three of them ran, not toward a door, not toward an exit, but toward the center, toward the memory the house had hidden even from itself. The room that never ends began to collapse, mirrors shattered, walls folded. The archivist screamed, caught between too many selves, and at the heart of it all, a stairwell. Going down, always down, they didn't hesitate. They descended into the dark. And above them, the house howled. For the first time in eternity, afraid. There was something unnatural about the stairs. It wasn't the length of them, though they stretched on far beyond what should have been possible, nor the way the wood stayed untouched by time or rot. It was the way the steps themselves didn't make sound. No creaks, no thuds, no breath echoing off the walls. It felt like they were descending into a place where sound wasn't allowed. Clara, Daniel, and Elias moved downward, each step heavier than the last, each second pulling them deeper into a quiet so thick it pressed on the bones behind their ears. Clara kept a tight grip on both of them, afraid that if she let go even for a heartbeat, she'd lose them to the dark. This wasn't just the house anymore. This was below the house. Beneath the architecture of memory and regret, this was where the decisions were made. Where something old, had built a root system into the minds of every child it had touched, and they were walking into its heart. How long have we been going down? Elias whispered. Daniel shook his head. There's no time here. He was right. There wasn't. Clara hadn't blinked in what felt like hours. Her legs didn't ache. Her mouth wasn't dry. There was no fatigue, only pressure. And then, suddenly, the stairs ended. Not at a landing, not at a door, just stopped. They stepped into a room so dark it seemed to devour their outlines. Clara reached out with one foot, felt solid floor, and moved forward. A second later, Elias followed. Daniel last. The moment they were all inside, the walls lit themselves, not with torches or bulbs, but with memory. Moving images. Projected directly from the fabric of the air, Clara saw herself as a baby, then as a child. Her first day of school, her first lie, her first drawing of a door. Elias appeared beside her in those memories, laughing, playing, and then vanishing. One moment there, the next gone, and Clara, blinking like nothing had changed. The house had erased him so cleanly that even her grief had been deleted. What is this place? She asked. Elias didn't answer. Daniel did. This is the archive below. They turned to him. You've been here before. His eyes were far away. No, but I've dreamed it. The room pulsed. Then the projections vanished, replaced by a single massive screen at the far end of the space. A chair rose from the floor in front of it. High, backed, black, and humming. The screen came to life. A voice filled the room. Cold, genderless, not loud but total. You have brought 3 selves. Clara stepped forward. We're not selves. We're people. No, the voice said. You are fractures. You are what was split, what was sacrificed. Who are you? Daniel asked. I am the part of the house that still remembers why. Clara narrowed her eyes. Why what? Why it began. Why it feeds. Why it chooses. The chair turned slowly to face them. No one sat in it, but they felt its gaze. The screen flickered, showing images too fast to comprehend, faces, doors, screams, endless staircases, blood blooming beneath floorboards, laughter that turned to sobbing, then back again. Elias took a step back. It's showing us what it is. No, Clara said. It's showing us what it wants to forget. The chair shuddered. The screen cut to black. The voice returned, thinner now, less confident. You cannot survive what is buried here. Daniel squared his shoulders. We didn't come to survive. Silence. Thens, you came to choose. The chair turned again. This time, the floor split apart beneath it, revealing a pit that went even deeper. A chasm without end. A red light pulsed from below, slow and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something dreaming in its sleep. The voice said, one must remain. One must carry the house. That is the rule. Clara shook her head. I already made that choice. Years ago, my father, his time is ending. The voice whispered. Memory decays. Purpose erodes. He is no longer enough. Daniel flinched, as if hearing something only he could. Elias looked at Clara, eyes wide. You don't have to do it again. I know, she said, voice trembling. Because none of us are going. A pause. Then laughter, mocking. Distant. You misunderstand. There is no door back. You are already inside. The floor began to sink, pulling them toward the chasm. Clara gripped the others tightly. Don't let go. The walls fell away. The screen melted. The chair cracked in half. The house was coming undone, not by force, by contradiction, by refusal. It had always fed on compliance, on people accepting that forgetting was easier, that leaving things behind was a kindness. But now, 3 people stood inside it holding hands, remembering together. The chasm yawned wider, and from it came the true voice, older than language, ragged, wounded. You were never meant to return. Clara stepped to the edge. We never left. And with that, she jumped, dragging Elias and Daniel with her. They fell. But this time, they brought their memories with them. The house had no defense for that. The house shattered. Not in fire, not in rage, but in remembrance, and far above. In every attic and closet and stairwell where the house had ever placed a door, the mirrors cracked, and the reflections looked away. They didn't hit the ground. Not in the way one expects when falling into the dark. No bone, breaking slam, no thud, no crushing weight of impact. Instead, Clara, Daniel, and Elias landed on something that felt like ground only because they stopped falling. The texture beneath them pulsed faintly, like a living lung or the inside of a heartbeat. They rose slowly, warily, unsure if gravity still worked the way it was supposed to in this place, or if rules had ever applied here at all. The air was thick and syrupy, not in substance but in memory. With each breath, Clara saw flashes of things she hadn't thought of in years: her 5th birthday, the smell of her mother's shampoo, the way her twin used to laugh through his nose when he tried to keep a secret. The memories weren't painful, but they were loud. Every thought pressed against her skull like it needed to be known right now. They weren't alone. At first, it seemed like shadows. But then the shadows stepped forward. People? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Some were children. Some were older. All of them had the same empty expression, like they had forgotten who they were mid-sentence and never remembered to finish the thought. Their eyes weren't blank, just wrong, as if their pupils had been scraped out and replaced with something reflective, like the mirrors. Elias tightened his grip on Clara's wrist. "They're the ones who stayed." Daniel whispered, "No, they're the ones who were kept." The crowd didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Clara could feel their gaze slicing across her mind, rooting through her past, searching for something they might recognize. That's when one of them stepped forward. A girl, 7, maybe 8. Long hair tied with a green ribbon. She opened her mouth. No sound came out, just ash. She raised her hand and pointed at Elias. Clara stepped in front of him instinctively. "No," she said. "He's not staying." The girl didn't blink. More ash fell from her mouth. Then, slowly, she turned around and walked back into the crowd. One by one, the others began to turn too. Not away, but toward something else. A light. Small. Flickering. At first Clara thought it was a torch, or a firefly, or some sort of illusion. But the closer it came, the more she recognized it. It was a lantern. Old, rusted, and held by a figure they all knew. Peter. Clara's breath caught. "What are you doing here?" Peter looked older, not in age, but in weight. Like he had carried something too long, and it had carved lines into his skin that didn't belong on an 11-year-old's face. "I followed the door," he said. "I had to." Elias whispered, "It shouldn't have opened for you." Peter shook his head. "It didn't. I opened it." Daniel stepped forward. "Why?" "Because I wanted to remember," Peter said. "And now I do. Everything." Clara reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "You shouldn't be here?" "Not yet." "You're not finished." Clara's voice was quiet. "What are we supposed to finish?" Peter turned and pointed toward a towering shape on the far side of the space. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. Maybe they hadn't seen it because they weren't ready. It looked like a cathedral. But wrong. Built from bones and staircases and pieces of forgotten rooms. One window burned red like a dying sun. Another was shattered, bleeding fog. The entire structure hummed with memory. Not the kind you relive, but the kind you bury deep and never speak of again. "The archivist came from there," Peter said. Daniel frowned. "You saw him?" Peter nodded. "He tried to stop me, tried to show me things I wasn't ready for. But I was ready. I remembered more than he expected." Clara stepped closer. "What's in there?" Peter looked her in the eye. "The root." Clara's stomach turned. You mean, Peter nodded. The thing that made the house. The first memory. The first door. The crowd of empty-eyed people began to move, slowly, like a tide, parting down the center to clear a path toward the cathedral. As they moved, some of them whispered. Not in words, in fragments. Don't forget me. I was here once. The red room never ends. Clara could feel their voices scratching her skin. But she kept walking, Daniel beside her, Elias close behind, Peter leading the way. They approached the cathedral's entrance, a double door made of mirror, glass and blackwood, inscribed with names. Thousands of them. Some Clara recognized, some she didn't. Some she wished she had forgotten. When Peter reached the door, he turned back to them. Once we're inside, it won't be like before. This place doesn't just show you what you lost, it makes you live it. All of it. Over and over. Until you choose. Choose what? Elias asked. Peter touched the door. To stay. Clara swallowed. And if we don't? Peter's voice was quiet. Then we take the house down with us. The doors opened, and everything changed. Inside the cathedral, there was no ceiling. Only a sky filled with swirling memories, flickering like film reels spliced together by a child with shaking hands. The pews were broken furniture, beds, closets, chairs, things stolen from children's rooms. The altar was a door, a single red-painted door bolted shut with 7 locks, and chained to that door was the thing that remembered first. It had no name, no shape. It shifted constantly, faces morphing, eyes blinking, mouths whispering. It was made of what people left behind, of every memory discarded like trash, of every, I'll deal with it later. Clara stepped forward. The thing raised its head and smiled with her mother's face. No, she said, trembling. The smile widened. You left me, it said in her mother's voice. You forgot me. You all did, Elias screamed. Daniel grabbed his head. Peter dropped the lantern. The light went out, and the room began to bleed. Not blood. Memory. It poured from the walls in great rivers of sound and image and sensation. Cold winters, empty cribs, lost toys, forgotten promises. The house was crying. Clara stepped toward the altar, toward the locks, and with each step she spoke. I remember. Click. The time we danced in the living room. Click. The day you gave me my name. Click. The smell of your jacket. Click. Your laugh when I said something stupid. Click. Your silence when I needed you most. Click. I still loved you. Click. The 7th lock fell. The door groaned, and behind it, the first room waited. Clara looked back at the others, and opened it. What she saw was everything. But she stepped through, because someone had to, and behind her, the house held its breath. Clara stepped through the red door, bracing herself for pain, for some sudden collapse of sanity, or a scream that would crack her ears open from the inside. But there was no pain, no sound, not even light. There was simply existence, a slow, creeping sense that she was no longer alone inside her body. The room greeted her not like a place, but like a host. It wrapped around her without touching, stared at her without eyes, and spoke into her mind without words. Her memories didn't flash in front of her. They rose up from under her skin. She was 5 again, lost in the aisles of a supermarket, her mother's name catching in her throat. The moment her panic began to rise, the shelves began to stretch upward, towering into impossible heights. Every product label twisted into a word she couldn't read, and then a door appeared between the cereal boxes. A red one, just like this. She had opened it back then. Or had she? The memory bent around her like heat. No, that wasn't a supermarket. It was her house. No, someone else's house. The room began reshaping itself to match her confusion. Walls slid into place from nowhere. Windows blinked into existence. Chairs blinked. Rugs breathed. And in the center of it all stood a child. A version of her that hadn't yet forgotten what it meant to be seen. Clara approached her younger self slowly, The girl wore her favorite dress, the one with the little foxes. It had vanished after the fire. No, not fire, something else. The house had taken it, taken her. This version of her looked up with wide eyes and said nothing. But the silence wasn't empty. It accused. "You gave me up," the girl finally whispered. Clara's breath caught. "I didn't know what I was doing." "You knew enough to leave." "I was scared." The girl tilted her head. "You weren't scared of me. You were scared of remembering me." The walls pulsed. A second door appeared. White this time. It bore no handle, just a single peephole. Daniel's voice echoed faintly from behind it. "Clara, can you hear me?" She turned to the girl. "Is that real?" The girl didn't answer. She walked to the white door, leaned her ear against it. The surface was ice cold. Beyond it, she heard Elias whispering her name, then silence, then breathing. Not theirs, the kind that filled up an entire room. She backed away. The child Clara raised her hand and pointed to the center of the room. "You can't leave until you remember what happened here." Clara frowned. "Here." The room pulsed again, and the floor fell away, not crumbled, just ceased to be. She tumbled into darkness and landed hard this time. No illusions. No safety. She hit carpet. Thin. It smelled of mildew and old tears. Her childhood bedroom. She sat up slowly. Her knees ached. Her fingers trembled. And there in the corner sat the thing. Not a monster, not even a ghost. Just form. A figure made of her shame. It wore her father's coat, and her mother's perfume. Its hands were too long, its eyes too kind. "Why did you leave me behind?" it asked, its voice a mixture of everyone she had ever loved. Clara choked. "Because I had to." "Why?" "Because remembering you hurt too much." It stood, and the room went black. Daniel paced the cathedral, fists clenched. He had tried the red door 3 times now. It wouldn't open again. Not for him. Not for Elias. Peter stood in the back, staring at the shattered window, his face a portrait of guilt. "She's in there too long," Daniel muttered. "It's changing her." Peter didn't move. Elias stepped up. "What if she's the one meant to stay?" Daniel turned sharply. "We're not doing that again." "That's how this works?" "No," Daniel growled. "That's how it works. But we're not playing by its rules anymore." The cathedral groaned above them. Dust fell from the rafters, and the altar cracked. Peter finally spoke. "If she doesn't make it out, we all stay." Elias looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean this is the anchor point," Peter said. "The place where the house first took root. If we leave without her, if we forget her, we give the house another seed. It starts again, in someone else." Daniel's face turned pale. They had never escaped. They had only paused it. Clara knelt in front of the thing that wore her past like a mask. It loomed over her now, all sympathy and terror tangled into one impossible shape. "You can leave," it said gently. "All you have to do is forget again." She closed her eyes, thought of Elias, of Daniel, of Peter, of herself, the real self, the one who had buried so many versions just to survive. "No," she whispered. "I won't forget again." The thing smiled and screamed. The room shattered like glass dropped in boiling water, and Clara stood in the wreckage of her first memory. All of it. The door, the disappearance, the silence at the dinner table afterward. She didn't just remember it, she owned it now. And that made all the difference. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the cathedral, standing in front of the altar. The red door, gone. The altar, ashes. Daniel ran to her. "I remember," she said. And the house howled. But this time, not from power, from fear. Because she had been its womb once, and now she had become its grave. The scream didn't come from the cathedral itself, not from the broken altar or the crumbling doorframe. It came from everywhere else, from the rafters, from the stained glass wounds in the walls, from the very shadows that clung like tar to the corners of the room. The house was screaming through every floorboard it had ever stolen, through every child it had swallowed, through every secret it had protected like a dragon curled over treasure. The scream rolled like thunder with teeth, long and wet and furious. Clara stood in the center of it all, hair whipped by winds that didn't belong to this world. Eyes locked on the nothing beyond the altar. She hadn't said anything since she'd come out. But Daniel could feel it. She'd brought something with her. Not a monster. Not a curse. Something older. Something far more dangerous than any ghost or forgotten god. She had brought back her name. The house had never feared a person before, but Clara wasn't a person anymore. She was a wound it couldn't close, a story it couldn't rewrite, a crack in its foundation that only widened the longer she stood still and remembered. Peter stepped toward her, his eyes wide. "What did you do?" "I remembered the truth," Clara whispered. "Not just what it did to us. What we did." Daniel shook his head. "What are you talking about?" Clara looked at them, her face empty of fear. The house didn't start as a place. It started as a pact. The walls cracked. A promise made by the first three who wanted to forget. They opened the first door. They laid the first brick. They let it feed, on themselves first. Then on the people they brought through it. Elias stepped forward. A pact. Not magic. Not evil. Just will, Clara said. The will to never face what we buried. And once the pact was made, it didn't need permission anymore. Peter sank to his knees. "So we built it. All of us did," she replied. "Each memory we gave up, each lie we told ourselves, each time we said, 'I can't deal with this right now.' The house grew because we asked it to." Daniel turned in place, eyes searching the cathedral. "So how do we stop it?" Clara stepped onto the altar's ashes. "We don't." Peter's voice broke. "What do you mean?" She knelt and pressed her hand against the stone. "We let it remember. All of it." The room convulsed. Wood snapped. Dust poured from the ceiling in waves. The stained glass liquefied and began running like blood down the walls. "No," Daniel said, grabbing her shoulder. "You said remembering is how we beat it." Clara turned to him, eyes burning with something too bright to be entirely human. "No. I said remembering is how we stop lying to ourselves. The house won't collapse because we hate it. It will collapse because it finally understands what it is." The floor heaved. And then, stairs, rising from the altar like vertebrae from the back of a buried giant. Steps that had never existed in any blueprint. Steps that led up. Clara didn't hesitate. She climbed. Daniel followed. Peter helped Elias to his feet, and they went last. The staircase moaned with each footfall, not in pain, but protest. As if the house knew where it led and was fighting against its own undoing. At the top was a room made of mirrors. But unlike the others, these didn't reflect the present. Each one was a frozen moment, a failure, a shame. Clara saw herself leaving Elias behind in the woods. Daniel saw himself closing the door on a crying patient. Peter saw his sister being taken and doing nothing. Elias saw nothing. He turned to Clara. "Why don't I have one?" She reached out and touched the mirror in front of him. It stayed black. "Because you never let yourself forget." He looked at her, eyes full. "That's why I was taken, wasn't it?"
"Yes,"
she said. "You resisted. You remembered everything, and the house had to silence you." The mirrors began to shudder. Crack. Whisper. From the cracks, hands emerged, but they didn't attack. They reached. They wanted out. Clara walked to the center of the room and faced the largest mirror of all. It reflected nothing. Not even her. Behind the glass stood a door, not painted, not built, drawn. In charcoal, it rippled when she looked at it. "Everything ends through there," she said. Daniel frowned. "That's not a door. It's a memory of one." She pressed her hand to it, and it tore, like paper. Beyond it, nothing but light, searing, white. But she walked through anyway, and the others followed. There was no floor on the other side, no sky, just weightlessness, like falling but not down. They drifted in memory, not just their own, everyone's. Every whisper the house had hidden, every scream buried in wallpaper, every apology that never reached its mark. And Clara whispered, "I remember for all of us." And the house began to forget. Its rooms folded in on themselves, its doors melted into the walls, its mirrors shattered into smoke. And somewhere, deep in the foundation, a scream finally went quiet, because the house, for the first time in its long, terrible existence, had no one left to hide for. It appeared overnight, without warning, without a sound. Where there had once been bare wall in the remnants of the cathedral's uppermost floor, there was now a door, unpainted, featureless, too smooth to be made of wood but too cold to be metal. No hinges, no knob, just there, humming at a frequency that Clara could feel deep in her molars. She knew better than to think this was the end. The house might have cracked, might have bled, but something inside it still moved. Not a remnant, not a ghost, something curious. Something that hadn't existed until now. Something that had been born from their remembering. The others felt it too. Elias stood furthest from it, arms crossed tightly against his chest, eyes flicking over the new door, as though watching a venomous animal inch toward him. Daniel sat on the floor, with his back against the altar's ruins, staring at the door like it had personally betrayed him. Peter hadn't said a word since they left the mirror stare. His silence felt more like retreat than reflection, as if he were quietly preparing himself for something none of them could see yet. And Clara? Clara had stopped pretending she was scared. She wasn't numb. She wasn't brave. She was just done with being tricked by things shaped like rooms and promises. "It wasn't here before," Daniel said finally, voice brittle. "We would have noticed." "It wasn't supposed to be here," Elias answered, not looking away. Something changed. "Clara," Peter finally whispered, "this door wasn't made. It was invited." That hung in the air like a bad smell. By who? Daniel asked. Elias finally looked at Clara. That's not the right question. Clara felt it before she understood it. The door hadn't come for any of them individually. It had come because of them. Because their collective remembering had twisted the house's core, had peeled back its illusions, and in doing so, had created a gap, a space where something else had come to look. The house had always been a predator, but now it was prey, and something was knocking on its broken walls. Something that wanted in. Clara stood. She walked slowly toward the new door. It didn't pulse, it didn't breathe. It watched. "You're not going in there?" Daniel said, standing. She didn't answer. "You don't even know what it is." "I don't need to know," Clara said softly. "I just need to see what it wants." Elias took a step forward. "What if it's worse?" Clara gave him a look he'd only ever seen in mirrors, one that belonged to people who had buried things so deep they forgot how to dig them back up. "Then it deserves to meet someone worse." And then she stepped through. No sound, no fanfare. Just gone. Daniel cursed and ran after her, Elias on his heels, Peter dragging himself up behind them. One by one, they entered the room that hadn't been there yesterday. They were no longer in the cathedral. The air was still, sterile, heavy with a pressure that made every breath feel like it came with a toll. The room was circular, white walls without corners. The ceiling lost in a gray fog that didn't drift so much as hover, waiting for them to do something interesting. No doors, no windows. Just the four of them now, alone in a place that felt more idea than architecture. "Is this another trick?" Peter whispered. Clara didn't answer. She was focused on the floor, because on the floor was a mirror. Not a shard, not a panel. A full circle, black as ink, framed in silver that throbbed like it had veins. And in the mirror, they weren't themselves. Clara looked down and saw a version of herself that was empty behind the eyes. Still smiling, still breathing, but vacant. The kind of person who had learned to forget and liked it. Daniel's reflection wore a priest's collar and was screaming, though no sound came through. Elias's version was chained to a hospital bed, eyes bleeding black tears, mouth sewn shut, and Peter's reflection wasn't even human, just smoke, watching. "These are possible futures?" Elias said. "No," Clara murmured. "These are offers." The mirror shimmered, and the reflections began to speak in unison. "What can make it easier? We can take it all away. You don't have to hurt anymore. You don't have to remember." Daniel backed up. "It's the same lie." Peter shook his head. "No, it's a better lie, that's the problem." The room darkened. Not around them, beneath them. The mirror grew deeper, and then they began to fall. But not physically. Memories fell first. Names blurred. Dates slipped. Clara grabbed her own wrist and dug her nails in. "Don't forget!" she shouted. Daniel screamed something, but it turned to static. Peter vanished first. Then Elias and Clara. She fell into her reflection. But this time, she fought back. She didn't fall into a forgotten version. She dragged it out. Her smiling, empty, eyed double resisted, clawed at her arms, whispered comfort like poison, tried to soothe her into letting go. But Clara screamed, "I am not yours!" and tore it from the mirror. The room shattered. Glass rained down in soft, whispering sheets, and she was standing in the cathedral again. Alone. The others gone, the new door sealed. And in her hand was her reflection's throat. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. She dropped it like a husk, and from the cracked mirror floor, a new path opened. Down. But not into darkness, into light. And light, she had learned, was far more dangerous, because it showed everything. The light wasn't sunlight. It wasn't artificial, either. It was memory, so dense and sharp that it had taken on color and weight. Clara stood at the edge of it. The cathedral now behind her, and the broken mirror, path stretching downward in narrow spirals, like a helix carved from glass and regret. Her hands were still shaking from the thing she'd dragged out of the mirror. The echo of her own voice still rang in her head. "I am not yours," and she wasn't sure whether it had been defiance or desperation. But the other Clara, the smiling, empty-eyed husk, was gone, shattered, left to rot in a room that should never have existed, that should have never been allowed to exist. She stepped down onto the helix path, and with each footfall the light grew stronger, not brighter, but closer. It pressed in against her skin like a fever you couldn't sweat out, like guilt wrapped in silk. Too soft to fight, but too heavy to ignore. This light didn't blind. It revealed. Shadows scattered in her wake, not because she was above them, but because they were done pretending to hide. The house hadn't been destroyed by force. It had been weakened by truth. And now the place beneath the house, the engine that had fueled it all, was stirring. She didn't know where the others were. Not really. They had vanished into the mirror's lie, swallowed by fragments of lives they hadn't lived, but had come dangerously close to choosing. Daniel's scream had sounded like it was fighting through water. Peter's final expression before he flickered away was too calm. That alone terrified her more than the screaming. Elias, he hadn't made a sound at all, just dissolved. Gone like a name someone never spoke again. But Clara remembered him. All of them. Every version. The spiral path ended in a chamber shaped like a keyhole. The walls glowed, etched with symbols that pulsed as though breathing. In the center stood a pedestal made of wood that blod. Its grain twisted in spirals, soaked with memory. Resting atop it was a book. Just one. Bound in cracked leather that looked disturbingly like dried skin. Its cover marked by a single red circle. No title, no lock, just a book. Clara stepped closer, expecting resistance, a scream, anything. But the room stayed still, as if waiting. She reached for the book. Her fingers grazed its surface, and it exhaled. Not literally, but in her mind. A gust of every scream the house had ever absorbed rushed into her thoughts. She saw every child it had taken, every whisper buried in wood grain, every footstep heard in an empty attic. The house hadn't been built, it had been fed, and this book was the first meal. The pages flipped open of their own accord, revealing images instead of text, sketches made by trembling hands. Some looked like rooms, others like faces, warped and folded as though seen through boiling water, and one sketch, drawn with such detail it made her heart stop, was of her. Not her now, her then. 5 years old, standing in front of the very first door she had ever seen. The red door. The one that had appeared in her dreams before it appeared in her hallway. Her hand hovered over the image, and the room shifted. The walls slid away in silence. The pedestal dissolved. The book remained, suspended in air. And from the far end of the chamber, a figure approached, slowly, limping, dragging one foot behind the other like it had forgotten how to walk properly. It wore no face, just a smooth surface where features should have been. But Clara knew it. "Why did you come back?" the faceless one asked. Its voice wasn't a sound, but a memory of one, like a recording warped over time. Clara's throat tightened. "Because you never left me. You were safe in forgetting." "No," she said, stronger now. "I was obedient in forgetting. That's not the same." The faceless one tilted its head. "You opened the first door. I was 5. You still opened it." Clara's hands balled into fists. "Because you put it there." "No," the faceless one replied. "You put it there. You wanted an escape." She flinched. "That's a lie." "Is it?" it asked, stepping closer. "You wanted to disappear. You begged for it. One night, in bed under the covers, after your parents fought so loud the walls shook. You prayed for a way out. I was a child." "Exactly," it said, almost gently. "And you gave birth to me." The light pulsed, and in that moment, Clara understood. The house hadn't chosen her. It had been born from her. From Elias. From Daniel. From Peter. From every child who had ever wished to be unseen. Untouched, forgotten. The house hadn't invaded their lives. It had answered a call. That was the true horror. Not that it hunted them, but that it was invited. The faceless one held out a hand. "Take the book. Place it in the mirror's remains. It will seal us. You can go. You'll forget again. And there will be no more doors." Clara looked at the book, then back at the creature she had once created. She stepped forward, lifted the book, held it in her arms. The chamber flickered. The light began to fade. And then she turned around, walked away. The faceless one didn't follow. It whispered, "You will regret this." But Clara only said, "I regret everything else." When she returned to the cathedral, Daniel was there. Barely. He looked like he'd aged a decade, eyes sunken, mouth twitching from some memory he couldn't fully shake. "You came back," he whispered. She placed the book down beside him. "I never left." Behind them, the mirrors began to scream, and the house began to rot. The house didn't crumble like a building. It didn't explode or collapse or sink into the earth. It rotted. Slowly, relentlessly, the way old wood buckles under the weight of silence, the way a lie turns into something too loud to ignore. Clara and Daniel stood at the edge of the cathedral as its walls peeled like scallops, the stone turning soft and black, the light losing its color. Time felt strange here, stretched too thin, like a rubber band that should have snapped long ago. The air was full of dust that wasn't dust, floating motes of memory too old to be useful but too stubborn to let go. Daniel hadn't said much since she returned with the book. He kept staring at it like it might open its mouth and scream. The way he looked at it. Clara could tell he remembered something he hadn't meant to. Something the house had buried in him long before any of them had stepped through the first impossible door. The book didn't hum or pulse. It didn't glow. It just sat there, heavy in a way that made your chest tighten if you stood too close. It was waiting for a decision, and the silence it created was more threatening than any of the house's howls had ever been. I saw it, Daniel finally said, not looking up. In the mirror. I saw the man I could have become if I let it win. Clara nodded. So did I. He swallowed. He was happy. That hung in the air, heavier than the book. Of all the tricks the house had used, that was the cruelest. Not the monsters. Not the doors. But the possibility that forgetting really would have made them feel better. That oblivion could be a balm if you just closed your eyes hard enough. Elias hadn't returned. Peter either. Clara didn't ask if Daniel had seen them. She didn't want to say it aloud. Saying it might turn it true, but somewhere inside her, a pulse of dread had already started to settle. They were gone, maybe not dead, but claimed. Absorbed. The house wouldn't let go of every memory. Not willingly. It needed fuel, even if it was burning itself from the inside now. The stairs they'd climbed earlier were gone. The cathedral had no doors anymore, no windows, no floor in some places. The rot was faster now, like it had realized they weren't going to feed it anymore. The red windows sagged like wet paper. The altar had crumbled into black dust, and still the book remained, untouched by the ruin around it. Clara stood, picked it up. It didn't resist her this time. She didn't open it. She walked to where the mirror floor had once been, now a crater of reflective ash, and she held the book out over the edge. Not to throw it, not to drop it, but to offer it. The air thickened instantly. A sound like 1,000 spoons scraping against glass echoed through the chamber. The house didn't have a mouth, but if it did, this was how it screamed now. Through every inch of its dissolving body, through the memories it refused to give up. Clara heard children laughing behind her, her mother calling her name, Elias shouting to run, Daniel whispering not to open the door. But none of them were real. They were scraps of what the house still had left, looping like a dying reel of film. She didn't flinch. "I'm not giving you what you want," she said aloud. "I'm giving you what you are." She placed the book on the ash. It didn't sink. It melted. Pages unraveled into ribbons of light, threads of memory unraveling back into the air. Every image they had once tried to forget rose into the space around them, flickering through the ruin like lanterns, held by ghosts, and the house began to shriek. Not in anger, in fear. It had never been meant to be remembered. It had existed in the dark corners. The quiet pauses. In every, "I don't want to talk about it." But now it was exposed, laid bare. No shadows left to crawl into. Clara felt the scream rip through her bones. Not pain, just presence. The way a dam trembles before it gives. Daniel staggered back, clutching his ears. Blood leaked from his nose. But Clara didn't move. She stood in the center of the death throes and welcomed them. And then, it ended. Not slowly. In a blink, the cathedral vanished. The floor vanished. The mirrors, the rot, the light, the pressure, all gone. She was lying on cold dirt, outside. Not in a forest, not in the city. Just a wide, empty field beneath a gray sky that didn't seem to care she was there. Clara sat up. Daniel was beside her, unconscious but breathing. His fingers twitched as if still reaching for something that had already slipped away. The wind blew gently across the field, carrying no memory, no weight, just air. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, Clara couldn't hear the house. No walls waited to close around her. No doors watched from cracks in the plaster. The silence was not empty. It was honest. She pulled Daniel into her arms and looked around the barren field. No signs. No ruins. Not even ashes. The house was gone, not destroyed, finished. But she knew, somewhere, in someone else's head, a child would close their eyes tonight and wish to be forgotten. And if enough of them wished at the same time, maybe the house would come back. Maybe not as a cathedral, maybe not with doors, but with something worse. Clara didn't have the strength to stop that now. But she had one thing left. She could remember. And maybe that would be enough. Clara woke to the sound of nothing. Real, raw nothing. No distant thunder of footsteps behind walls, no groaning timbers, no whispers from vents that shouldn't exist. Just the wind brushing over an open field, the flap of her coat against her side, the soft, rhythmic breath of Daniel still unconscious beside her. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. Peaceful implies resolution, closure, a kind of safety earned after the final confrontation. This was something else entirely. This was a world that didn't know she existed anymore. The house was gone, and with it, the tether to something so enormous and ancient it had shaped her every step since she was 5 years old. Without it, the world felt indifferent. Daniel stirred, eyes fluttering open as if waking from underwater. He didn't speak, not at first, just blinked up at the endless gray sky and let a slow breath escape through cracked lips. His first word wasn't where, or what, or how. It was who. Clara looked at him carefully. Daniel. He turned to her, recognition slowly returning like a tide. You brought us out. I didn't bring us anywhere, she said. The house let go. His brow furrowed, confused. It doesn't let go. It did this time, she answered. It had no choice. Daniel sat up with effort, every movement groaning through stiff joints and sore muscles. It's really gone, she nodded. He looked around. Where are we? Clara shook her head. No idea. It's nowhere I've ever seen. And yet, she trailed off. There was something about the place, flat land, gray sky, a single tree far in the distance. Something eerily familiar but impossible to place. Daniel pulled his knees up and rested his arms over them. What about Elias? Peter? Clara looked away. They didn't come through the same way we did. He understood immediately. Didn't press. Didn't need to. The quiet between them grew heavy, not because of grief, but because of everything left unsaid. The weight of survival. How it comes with a guilt that never really fades. They had made it out. But out of what? A place that never had walls, never had foundations. The house was never just a location. It was an idea. And they had killed that idea. At least for now. Daniel rubbed his face. What do we do now? Clara tilted her head, squinting at the sky. Live. I think that's all we've got left. He gave a weak, bitter chuckle. Don't remember how. Then we'll have to learn. They didn't speak again for hours. Just sat together in the field as the wind picked up, the sky never darkening. Never brightening. It was as if the world itself had stopped, unsure of whether to continue now that the thing beneath it had been exorcised. By nightfall, though there was no sun to watch descend, they saw the lights, far in the distance. Flickering orange. Not fire, not torches, windows, a town. Daniel stood first, wincing as his joints cracked. You think it's real? He asked. Clara followed, stretching limbs that didn't quite feel like her own yet. I think it's worth finding out. They walked in silence. The grass grew thicker the further they went, taller, almost shoulder high in some places. It hissed when the wind passed through it, like 1,000 people whispering and stopping just as you turned your head. Clara tried not to think of it. She had left the house, left its mirrors, left its lies, but memory wasn't something you could carve out cleanly. It stained. Even if you painted over it, the town looked normal. That, more than anything, terrified her. Neat homes, brick chimneys, lights in windows, children's bikes on porches. Too normal. Daniel slowed as they reached the first mailbox. Clara. She already saw it. The street name Reflection Way. Her stomach turned. Daniel pointed at a house across the road. That's my dad's truck. Clara stared. That's impossible. I'm telling you. That's his license plate. Clara turned slowly, scanning the town. The homes weren't familiar in any obvious way, but every window, every driveway, held some echo of their past. A jacket her sister once wore, a flower pot her mom used to keep at the front door, a book bag Daniel hadn't seen since elementary school. "No," she whispered. "No, no, this is wrong." Daniel stepped toward the house. What if it's just memories? Residue? Clara grabbed his arm. What if it's not? What if this is the house? He froze. We destroyed it. What made it remember? We never made it forget us. The wind picked up again, stronger, carrying a new sound now. Laughter, children, playing somewhere just out of view. Daniel whispered, "Elias." Clara looked toward the end of the street and saw a boy standing in the road, his back to them, still, staring at a red door leaning against a picket fence. Clara's heart stopped. "Elias," she shouted. The boy didn't move. They ran to him, and as they got closer, Clara saw it wasn't Elias. Not exactly. He had Elias's hair, Elias's posture, but not his age, not his face. This was Elias before the house, before he was taken, before he remembered. Daniel reached out. "Don't," Clara warned, but it was too late. His hand touched the boy's shoulder. The sky cracked open, not with light, but with sound. A howl. Not from above, from below. Clara turned in horror as the ground beneath the boy's feet buckled, splintered, peeled back like rotten skin, and beneath it, black stairs spiraling downward. Another door, another house, the same house, just younger, hungrier. It hadn't ended. It had reset. Daniel backed away, shaking. "We didn't kill it." Clara's voice was hollow. "We taught it." The boy turned, smiled, and opened the red door. Clara didn't scream. She just remembered, and the door smiled back. The door opened like it had been waiting for them all along. No creak, no resistance. Just a quiet swing inward, revealing a hallway too narrow for human design. The walls lined with peeling floral wallpaper that blinked when Clara looked directly at it. The boy, Elias or something wearing the shape of him, stepped inside without hesitation, swallowed by the shadow at the end of the hall before either she or Daniel could move. The street behind them was gone, just gone. One moment, houses and trees and wind. The next, nothing but gray fog curling at their backs like breath on glass. There was no going back. There never had been. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since touching the boy. "It's not over." Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. The house reborn, was alive again, but it didn't feel like a resurrection. It felt like a continuation. Like a clock that had only paused for a heartbeat, pretending to stop. Everything inside her screamed to run, but her feet moved forward, just like they always had, just like they always would. The hallway yawned open as they entered, not physically expanding, but permitting them, and the second the door closed behind them, it vanished. No hinges, no outline, just more wall closing the trap. The air was humid, thick with the scent of forgotten years, old perfume, mothballs, burnt toast. The kind of smells that didn't belong in the same memory, but had been smashed together by something trying too hard to feel human. Clara reached out and ran her fingers along the wall. It was soft, too soft. The wallpaper pulsed gently beneath her touch, like it was breathing or dreaming. "Where are we?" Daniel whispered. Clara shook her head slowly. "It's not a place." "Then what is it?" She looked ahead, her voice distant. "It's us." They turned a corner, and the hallway stretched into a living room that looked torn from a childhood television set. Plastic-covered couches, box TV humming static, a fish tank glowing in one corner. But the fish inside were all wrong. Too many fins, no eyes, some of them drifting belly up but still swimming in tight, slow circles. A fireplace burned without smoke, and above it, a family portrait. Clara stepped closer, squinting. It was them. All of them. Her Daniel, Elias, Peter. But not the way they remembered. These versions smiled too wide, their eyes too bright. Like someone had painted joy over pain with colors that didn't quite dry. Daniel touched the frame and flinched. A droplet of blood welled from his finger where the wood had bitten him. "It's feeding again," Clara said. "But this time, it's learned our tricks. It's using our memories against us." Daniel looked at her. "Then we don't trust anything. Not even each other." They moved forward. Every room they passed shifted subtly when they looked away. Furniture moved. Rugs stretched. Windows vanished. And always, just out of sight, was the sound of someone else walking. The boy, the Elias shape, luring them deeper. Eventually they reached a stairwell. It went both up and down. 2 doors, side by side. One painted white, one black. Neither labeled. Daniel pointed. "Which way?" Clara studied both for a long moment, listening. The white door was silent. The black one hummed. Not like a machine. Like a voice with no mouth, vibrating against the edge of hearing. Clara stepped to the black door. "This one remembers." Daniel frowned. "Isn't that dangerous?" She nodded. "Exactly." They opened it together. Darkness swallowed them. Not empty, just unlit. Until one by one, small lights began to blink on, each one a memory. Not projected, present. They walked down a hall made of moments, scenes frozen mid-thought. There was Peter, kneeling by a grave. Elias in a hospital bed, smiling through split lips. Daniel alone in a confession booth, face in hands. Clara herself, curled on a bathroom floor, holding her own mouth shut to stop the scream. None of them spoke. These weren't things meant to be shared. They were scars. And here, the house wore them proudly. At the hall's end, another door waited. This one wasn't red. It was made of mirrors. Not one, thousands. Each shard angled, cracked, glinting. Clara reached out and the surface rippled. Her reflection didn't move. Neither did Daniel's. But behind their still images, other versions of themselves stared back, versions who had stayed. Versions who had given in. Daniel leaned closer, whispering, "What if we're just one choice away from them?" Clara's voice was steady. "Then we keep choosing." She pushed the mirror door. It didn't swing open. It shattered. And they stepped through. Not into a room, but into a memory so massive it had become real. They were in a hospital hallway. Cold tiles. Fluorescent buzz. Somewhere down the hall, a child was sobbing. Daniel turned pale. "I know this place." Clara did too. It was the last place Elias had ever been seen before the house claimed him. The place his body had disappeared from. It hadn't taken him through magic. It had taken him through grief. They moved quickly now, the sound of the crying growing sharper. The hallway never ended. Every step forward shifted them sideways. Nurses blurred by in fast motion. Lights flickered as if losing patience. And then, a door opened ahead. The crying stopped. Inside the room, Elias sat on the floor, knees to chest. He looked up, not surprised. Not scared, just tired. "You're late," he said. Clara stepped forward. "You're alive." "Not really," he replied. Daniel rushed in. "We thought you were gone." Elias smiled, hollow. I still am." He looked at Clara. "This version of me is what the house saved. Not the real one." She knelt beside him. "Then come with us." "I can't. I'm part of it now." "But I can help." The walls shuddered. Time cracked. Elias leaned forward, whispering, "There's still one door left." Daniel frowned. "Where?" Elias looked up. And above them, impossibly suspended in the sky of this impossible room, was a final door. Red, of course, but smaller than the others, like it had shrunk, or recoiled, waiting for the final memory it hadn't yet devoured. Clara stood slowly. "I know what it's waiting for," she said. Daniel looked at her. "What?" She turned to him. "The first moment I stopped being a child." And with that, she walked toward the door in the sky. Not climbing. Rising. Because memories float when you finally stop pushing them down. And the house, for the first time, hesitated. Clara didn't climb. She didn't fly. She rose. Gravity gave up on her, as if the house itself had stopped enforcing the rules it once twisted so cruelly. Daniel could only watch, frozen in that sterile hospital hallway, as she floated toward the red door suspended above their heads. It hung in the air like judgment, smaller than before, the size of a confession rather than a threshold. As Clara got closer, the hallway around them began to flicker, pieces of ceiling blinking in and out like a skipped frame, the walls melting into moments from other rooms, other lives. The house was fracturing not from violence but from understanding. That terrified it more than anything. The red door didn't open. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a memory trapped in muscle. Clara hovered inches from it and didn't touch it. Not yet. She could feel the pressure behind it, the weight of everything she'd buried under years of distraction and survival. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't even just about Elias or Daniel or Peter. The house had always been more than walls. It was a response, a mirror for every dark thing no one wanted to face. And now it was afraid. Daniel shouted up to her, his voice strained and distant. "What do you see?" Clara didn't answer right away. The red of the door wasn't just paint. It was flesh, veined, pulsing with a weak but stubborn rhythm. It was alive in the way trauma is alive, never healing, just mutating to fit whatever cage it's in. She reached forward, fingertips grazing the surface. The door exhaled. Behind her, the sky rippled. Daniel shouted again, but the sound fractured. The air was coming apart, not from noise, from recognition. The house had been made strong by forgetting, but now every remembered truth tore it further open. The moment she touched the doorknob, if it could be called that, Clara was inside, not through the door, not through space, just inside, inside her memory, not someone else's version, not the house's echo, hers. The bedroom was small, pink wallpaper with yellow stars, stuffed animals lining the shelves, each one facing the door as if they too had known what was coming. Clara stood in the center, barefoot smaller, 10 years old again, the version of herself that had closed this place off and walked out of it with a piece missing. The red door stood in the corner, impossibly wrong in its placement, humming with anticipation. Across the room was the other door, the real one, the one her father had opened that night, voice soft, smile tight, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to betray something delicate. Clara felt her heart start to race. No, she whispered to herself. Not again. But she knew why the house had brought her here, why it had needed this door. This was the wound it fed on the longest. This moment, this one decision. The night she didn't scream. The night she didn't run. The night she pretended not to understand what was happening. Her older self stood still in that childhood body, watching the two doors pulse in sync. The red one offered forgetting. The bedroom door offered memory. Truth, consequences. She walked to the bedroom door, grasped the handle, turned. The memory didn't resist. She opened it, and the house screamed. Not the sound it had made before, not fury, not hunger, terror. Because Clara was finally reclaiming the last thing it had stolen from her, her voice. She watched her father step into the room, her child self sitting frozen on the bed, wide-eyed and silent, and then she shouted not at him, at herself. "Run!" Her child self blinked, past the man in the doorway, down the stairs, out into the street. And with that, the moment changed. The timeline cracked, because this version of her had escaped. The house lost its grip. All the rooms built from this moment, gone. The cathedral, the forest, the mirror maze, gone. Clara stood alone again, but taller now, stronger, the memory rewired by truth, not erasure. She wasn't floating anymore. She was standing beneath the shattered red door, its pieces drifting like dried petals around her. Daniel stood ahead, tears in his eyes, the hallway behind him warping in on itself. "It worked," he whispered, but Clara shook her head. "Not yet." The floor buckled, walls folded inward, a rumble tore through the air. Not sound, collapse, a final convulsion. The house dying, not from fire or destruction, but from resolution. Clara grabbed Daniel's hand. They ran, through folding hallways, past howling vents, across collapsing staircases that no longer led anywhere. The house didn't fight to stop them. It begged. Voices cried out from the walls. Wet. Stay. You'll be safe here. But they kept running. The exit found them. A patch of light no bigger than a window. They leapt. And the house, for the first time, wept. Clara landed hard on grass. Real grass, beneath a real sky. Daniel beside her, coughing, laughing, crying. The door behind them was gone. Not closed. Gone. And so was the house. Not destroyed. Just finally remembered enough to let go. Clara didn't speak for hours after they escaped. Neither did Daniel. They sat in the grass of a nameless field under a sky that finally knew how to carry silence. The wind didn't whisper anymore. The ground didn't tremble. And when Clara placed her hand on the dirt beneath her, it stayed solid, unmoving, unrevealing, and most importantly, quiet. No shadows stretched farther than they should. No voices rode the breeze. For the first time in years, the world felt like it belonged only to itself again. Daniel lay flat on his back, arms stretched out, watching clouds crawl across the sky. He looked years older now, not because of age, but because of exposure. The kind that left your soul raw, your bones humming with memories you couldn't forget, no matter how much your body wanted to. Clara had seen it before, on herself, in mirrors she'd avoided, in Peter's final silence, and most of all in Elias, whose eyes had once held a scream so deep he didn't know he was making it. But now even that scream was gone. The house had taken it, chewed on it, and finally, forgotten it. You think it's really over? Daniel asked, barely above a whisper. Clara didn't look at him. It's never over. It just forgets. He frowned. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. Daniel sat up slowly, wiping at his eyes. I keep seeing it, even with my eyes open. That last version of the house, how familiar it was. Like it didn't need to scare us anymore. It just needed to feel like home. Clara nodded. Because it was home, in pieces. It made itself out of us. Out of what we never said, what we hid. It used the quiet parts of our lives to build rooms. Daniel turned to her. And the doors. They were always choices. Moments when we could have spoken, or screamed, or run, and didn't. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by us. The wind passed again, and with it a new kind of stillness. A final one. Daniel looked down at his hands. I feel empty. You're not. Then what am I? Clara looked at him then. Really looked. You're free. He laughed, bitter and hollow. Freedom's scarier than the house ever was. She understood. The terror hadn't been in the monsters. It was in the remembering. The knowing. The breaking of the pact they had made with silence. Because that's what the house really was. A shrine to the things we dare not say. Every time they had bitten their tongues, swallowed their pain, smiled through the ache, the house had taken it, stored it, twisted it into hallways and doors, and now that shrine had collapsed. But what was left? Not healing, not yet, just space. And that, Clara realized, was the most frightening part. There was nothing now forcing her to keep going. No goal. No monster. No rescue. Just her and the path ahead. One step at a time, into a world that wouldn't wait for her to catch up. They stood together. Walked without direction. Passed through a valley that didn't echo. Over a stream that didn't reflect anything wrong. They reached a road, cracked, old, almost reclaimed by the earth. And in the distance they saw a town. A real one this time. Not conjured. Not borrowed from memory. No familiar windows. No impossible shapes. Daniel slowed. What if it's another trick? Clara squinted. Then we'll know. He laughed again. Less bitter now. That's not very reassuring. It's not meant to be, she said. But it's real. They followed the road. No signs. No cars. Just the sound of footsteps that belonged to them for once. When they reached the town limits, the first thing Clara noticed was the smell. Fresh bread, car exhaust, laundry. Not smoke or mildew or dead air. A small grocery store stood on the corner, lights humming, door open. People moved inside, talking, shopping, existing, and none of them turned to stare. None of them whispered. They didn't notice Clara and Daniel at all, which meant it was real. Real people don't notice you when you walk into a store wearing a 1,000-yard stare. They wandered inside, bought water, candy bars, paid with real money they found in their jackets, money they didn't remember keeping. Daniel bit into a Snickers like it was the first meal he'd ever had. God, he muttered, mouth full. This is better than oxygen. Clara sat on the curb outside, watching the street. No red doors. No mirrored windows. Just a town. Just life. Daniel sat beside her. What do we do now? She thought about that for a long time. The question wasn't new. It had hung over her since the first crack in the first hallway, since she had realized the house wasn't a place you escaped from, but a thing you carried. Even now, it lingered on the edge of her thoughts, like a song she couldn't quite forget. But finally, she had an answer. We'll live. Daniel looked skeptical. She smiled, soft and tired. One boring, ordinary day at a time. And the house, wherever its ashes lay, didn't stir, because forgetting at last had become its prison, and memory, brutal and clean, had finally set them free. You said they found a motel just past the edge of town. A squat, concrete thing with faded blue doors and cracked plastic chairs bolted to the walkway outside each room. It smelled like mildew, old coffee, and road salt. It was perfect. Real places had flaws. Real places didn't breathe when you looked away. Clara stepped into room 7, flicked on the overhead light. Yellow, buzzing. Just dim enough to feel slightly wrong, and for the first time in what felt like years, let herself collapse onto a real mattress. It creaked. It didn't scream. That was enough. Daniel took the room next door. No protests. No lingering together like survivors huddling in a trench. They didn't need to be joined at the hip anymore. The house was gone. Whatever had connected them had snapped, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The trauma wasn't shared anymore. Now it was theirs, individual and silent, waiting to be unpacked one scar at a time. Clara stared at the ceiling and felt the first sting of real exhaustion hit her chest like a weight. It didn't feel like dying. It felt like existing, in a way she hadn't done since the first door. She woke hours later in sweat, heart pounding, with no memory of the dream that broke her sleep. It didn't matter. Even if she couldn't remember it, she knew what it had been. There was always another hallway, another red door, another version of herself too scared to choose. That would never leave. The house was gone, but the rooms it built had been inside her long before she stepped across the first threshold. It hadn't constructed them. It had revealed them, amplified what was already broken. She got up and padded barefoot to the bathroom. Cold tiles, a real faucet. Water that didn't run red or hiss. She splashed her face, stared into the mirror, not warped, not reflective of some other place. Just her, hollow-eyed, pale, but alive. She didn't recognize herself, and that felt strangely hopeful. If she didn't know who she was now, maybe that meant she wasn't trapped in who she'd been before. When she returned to bed, a knock came. 3 soft raps. Not frantic, not urgent. She opened the door and Daniel stood there, hoodie zipped, eyes heavy. "I can't sleep," he said. She nodded. "Neither can I." He stepped in, sat on the edge of her bed like he belonged there, like they were still tethered by shared horror. She didn't push him away, didn't speak. They sat in silence until he finally whispered, "Do you think they're still in there?" "Peter? Elias?" Clara didn't answer. "I keep thinking," he continued, "that if we went back, maybe we could find the right version. The timeline where they made it out. Like there's a version of the house where everything ends clean." "There isn't," she said. "That's the trap. It'll always show you the version, where you think one more step could make it right. Yeah, he muttered. That's the part that still feels like it has teeth. She looked at him then, really looked. He was thinner. His hands twitched. His left eye wouldn't stop watering. The house had taken more than time. It had taken shape from them, and now it was gone, and they didn't know how to fit back into themselves. He rubbed his hands together like they were dirty and whispered, I don't even remember how I got to the house. Not the real first time. I just remember waking up there. In the hallway. I thought it was a dream. A nightmare. But it wasn't, was it? No, Clara said. It never was. They sat for a while longer. Then, without saying another word, he left. And she let him go. The next morning was too bright. The motel window didn't have a curtain, just a slatted blind that let in stripes of sunlight like prison bars. Clara dressed slowly, her body sore from real sleep. When she stepped outside, Daniel was already by the vending machine, punching a plastic water bottle loose. His eyes were sunken, but there was a flicker of something in him now, a kind of stunned defiance. I had a dream, he said without turning. Clara waited. I was back in the mirror room, but the mirrors were covered in cloth. Black sheets. Every one of them. And there were names sewn into the fabric. Names I didn't recognize. Clara's stomach turned. Did you touch them? Daniel looked at her. Yeah. And they screamed, but not like voices, like rooms. Like the whole house was trapped under that fabric. Each one a memory wrapped too tight. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Clara said, we should burn the rest. Daniel blinked. What rest? Anything that still has pieces of it. The sketches, the notes, whatever survived in our stuff. We don't keep relics, even the journal. Especially the journal. They drove back to Clara's old apartment 3 days later. It hadn't changed. Still smelled like books and damp carpet and incense she never actually lit. The journal was under her bed, in a box labeled college. She pulled it out, and the second she touched the leather, she felt the pull. Not a supernatural force, not magic, just curiosity. That was worse. She opened it. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before the house took her. It simply read, I think I'm losing days. Doors appear where they didn't exist before. I keep finding sand in my shoes. No beach. No memory. Daniel stared over her shoulder. Burn it now. She didn't argue. They took it to a fire pit in the woods, used lighter fluid and dead branches, watched it curl into smoke. No screaming. No phantom hands trying to claw free. Just ashes. Clara tossed in a handful of sketches next. The last thing she burned was a tiny red key she didn't remember ever finding, but it had been on her nightstand. Waiting. As it melted, Daniel whispered, Think we got all of it. Clara watched the flame flicker, her face lit like an ending. No, she said. But I think we got enough to keep the door closed. And in the trees behind them, for the first time in a very long while, nothing watched back. Clara always thought the house would follow her. In dreams, in shadows, in the pause between blinking and waking. For years, she expected to hear its groaning floors or feel its cold breath snake across her skin whenever the room got too quiet. But that never happened. There were no final hauntings. No lingering ghost. What lingered was memory, a dull ache like a healed fracture that twinges before a storm. She never went back to the town where it all began. She didn't need to. The house wasn't in a place anymore. It was in the not knowing, the silences people live inside, the conversations they never finish, the pain they lock away in their private architecture. But it had learned, through them. It had been seen. And what's seen cannot stay the same. That was the closest thing to killing it they could ever achieve. Not with fire, not with escape, but by remembering. Daniel moved 2 towns over, got a job at a bookstore. He grew a beard, started collecting records. Sometimes he'd call her, and they'd talk about nothing. Weather, Work, a strange customer. But every so often, they'd both pause. Quiet would settle between them, and in that silence, there was a knowing. A mutual agreement not to ask if they were okay, not to ask about the house. That was the pact now. They didn't forget, but they didn't give it shape. Years passed. Peter's body was never found. Neither was Elias's. And in a way, Clara was grateful. If they'd found something, bones, clothing, some horrible confirmation, it would have offered too simple an answer. The house didn't deal in closure. It trafficked in potential, in maybes, in could-have-beens. The unknown was its final act. Clara learned to live with that. She even came to respect it. She went on walks now, long ones, through places with trees and no straight paths. She liked the ones that forked unexpectedly, that dared her to choose. That's what the house had been all along, a place made of choices. The kind you run from, the kind you bury, the kind you think you'll have time to make later. One day, deep in a forest where the air was clean and the dirt didn't remember anything, Clara found a door, not red, not ornate, just wood, old, unhinged, leaning against a fallen log, weathered by rain and time. It didn't lead anywhere. Behind it was nothing but trees. She stared at it for a long time, then smiled, because now she understood. It had never been about what was behind the doors. It was about whether or not you'd walk through without knowing. Clara turned away and kept walking. She didn't need to open it. She had finally closed hers. And that, more than any fire or forgetting, was how you end a haunted house. You stop living in it.